Hello there, and welcome to our channel, a place where curiosity is allowed to slow down, where questions are not rushed toward answers, and where science is given time to breathe. This channel has always been about taking familiar ideas and gently turning them over, not to unsettle you, but to look at them from an angle that feels calm, thoughtful, and unhurried. Tonight's topic is one of those ideas that sounds strange at first, almost playful, but grows quieter and more serious the longer you sit with it. We tend to think of Earth as home in the most obvious way possible. It is where we were born. It is where every human story has unfolded. It is where our languages formed, where our cities rose, where our ancestors lived and died. The ground beneath our feet feels permanent, dependable, unquestionable. And yet, sometimes the most interesting questions begin when we gently loosen our grip on what feels unquestionable. Not to reject it, but to examine it more closely. So tonight, instead of asking how humanity evolved on Earth, or when the first humans appeared, we will slow the question down even further and ask something more basic. What if Earth is not where humanity truly began? What if this planet, for all its familiarity, is not the original home of our species, but a place we arrived at long ago, adapted to over time, and eventually forgot was ever unfamiliar? This idea is not being offered as a claim or a conclusion. It is not an argument, and it is not a declaration. Think of it instead as a long, careful thought experiment, the kind you might entertain while watching clouds move or listening to a distant train pass at night. We're not here to prove anything. We're here to explore what happens when we ask the question slowly, carefully, and without urgency. Before we go any further, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from right now? Are you somewhere quiet or somewhere familiar? Is it late evening, early morning, or one of those hours that feels suspended between the two? It's interesting to think that no matter where you are standing or resting on the same planet that has carried every human who ever lived. That shared ground is part of what makes this question feel so intimate. If you find this kind of calm exploration soothing, or if it helps your thoughts settle after a long day, you're very welcome to like the video or subscribe. It helps this small space reach others who might enjoy science delivered without sharp edges or raised voices. There's no pressure, of course. You're free to simply listen and let the ideas drift by. Now let's begin gently. Human beings are remarkably confident about Earth being our home. Yet that confidence is rarely examined. We grow up learning the story of human evolution as a straight line rooted firmly in African soil. We learn about early hominins, stone tools, fire, migration across land bridges, and gradual adaptation to different environments. This narrative is supported by a vast body of evidence, and none of what we'll discuss tonight seeks to discard it. But confidence, even well-earned confidence, can sometimes make us overlook quieter questions. For example, what does it actually mean to say a species belongs to a planet? Is it simply the place where it currently lives? Or is it the environment for which it is best suited, most naturally adapted, least strained by gravity, radiation, climate, and biological stress? When we say Earth is our home, are we saying it is where we emerged or merely where we survived? The human body is an interesting place to start thinking about this. For a species that has lived on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years, we are surprisingly fragile here. Our backs are poorly suited for upright walking, leading to chronic pain and injury. Our skin is vulnerable to solar radiation, requiring protection to avoid damage. Our eyesight struggles under both low light and extreme brightness. Our ability to regulate body temperature is limited compared to many animals, forcing us to rely on clothing, shelter, and technology. These facts are not evidence of alien origin. They are simply facts, but they invite curiosity. Many species on Earth appear deeply comfortable in their environments. Birds are built for flight. Fish are shaped for water. Reptiles bask easily under the sun. Humans, by contrast, seem to survive by constant adjustment. We modify our surroundings rather than blending into them. We build, cover, shield, and regulate. Even our earliest ancestors relied on tools and fire in ways that set us apart. This reliance on external adaptation raises a quiet question. Did we evolve to master our environment because Earth was always our home, or because mastering environments was the only way to survive in a place that was not originally suited to us? Another curious detail is our relationship with gravity. Human skeletons show signs of strain from Earth's gravitational pull. Bone density loss occurs quickly when gravity is reduced, suggesting our bodies are finely balanced but not necessarily optimized. Some researchers have casually noted that a slightly lower gravity environment might place less stress on human joints and cardiovascular systems. Again, this proves nothing, but it adds texture to the thought experiment. If Earth were not humanity's original home, what might that original environment have been like? Perhaps a planet with slightly lower gravity. Perhaps one with thicker atmospheric protection from radiation. Perhaps one with more stable temperatures or gentler seasonal shifts. Or perhaps something stranger than we currently imagine. At this point, it's important to stay grounded. There is no evidence that humans arrived on Earth in spacecraft, or that an advanced civilization seeded this planet with people. The question is not about spaceships or visitors in the cinematic sense. It is about time scales so vast and memories so erased that arrival would not resemble anything we recognize today. Consider how quickly knowledge disappears. Entire languages vanish within a few generations. Civilizations collapse and leave behind fragments that puzzle archaeologists. Written history itself spans only a few thousand years, a blink compared to the age of our species. If humanity had arrived on Earth hundreds of thousands or even millions of years ago under circumstances we no longer remember, what traces would realistically remain? Stone tools would look like stone tools. Early shelters would erode. Bones would fossilize indistinguishably from native species. Even genetic markers could blur over time through mutation and adaptation. Memory, especially cultural memory, is fragile. It does not take long for origins to become myths, and myths to become metaphors. Speaking of myths, nearly every ancient culture has stories of humans descending from the sky, being shaped by beings from above, or arriving after a great catastrophe elsewhere. These stories are usually interpreted symbolically, and rightly so. Myths are not records, but they often preserve emotional truths, anxieties, and questions that matter deeply to the people who told them. It is striking how often the idea of arrival appears rather than creation. Humans emerge fully formed, taught, guided, or placed. These stories are not evidence, but they are data of a different kind. They show that humans have long wondered whether they truly belong here, or whether they came from somewhere else and forgot There is also the matter of timing. Anatomically, modern humans appear relatively suddenly in the fossil record, with cognitive abilities that seem to accelerate faster than expected. Art, language, symbolic thought, and complex social behavior arise within a relatively narrow window of time. Evolution can move quickly under the right conditions, but these leaps have long puzzled researchers. Various explanations exist, from genetic mutations to environmental pressures to social complexity, reaching a tipping point. All of these are plausible. Yet, the speed of the change leaves room for curiosity. Not suspicion, but curiosity. If humanity had already possessed advanced cognitive frameworks elsewhere, and Earth represented a reset, a bottleneck, or a refuge, then rapid redevelopment of complex behavior might make sense. Another angle worth considering is Earth itself. This planet is not static. Its climate has shifted dramatically. Asteroid impacts, volcanic winters, ice ages, and mass extinctions have reshaped life repeatedly. If humanity originated elsewhere, what might have happened to that place? A planetary catastrophe could erase a civilization entirely, leaving only survivors who adapted to a new world with no clear memory of their past. Mars often enters these conversations, not because of evidence of human origin, but because it appears to have once been more Earth-like. It had liquid water, a thicker atmosphere, and a magnetic field that could protect life. Today it is cold, dry, and irradiated. If intelligent life had emerged there long before humans existed, and if a catastrophe forced migration, Earth would have been a natural destination. This remains speculation layered on speculation, but it is a useful mental exercise. It reminds us that planets change, that habitability is temporary, and that life, if it survives long enough, must sometimes move or perish. There is also the idea of panspermia, which suggests that life itself may travel between planets via meteors, asteroids, or cosmic dust. Microbial life could survive extreme conditions and seed new worlds. This idea is taken seriously in astrobiology. If life can travel, then ancestry becomes less local than we tend to assume. Humanity's lineage, under this view, could be part of a much older cosmic story. Earth would not be the beginning, but one chapter in a long chain of environment shaping life over immense spans of time. That thought does not diminish Earth's importance. If anything, it deepens it. Earth becomes not just home, but sanctuary. As you listen, you might notice that none of these ideas demand belief. They ask only for attention. The question is not whether Earth is our original home, but why the idea feels both strange and oddly familiar. Why it unsettles us slightly, even as it intrigues us. Perhaps it touches on a quiet feeling many people share, a sense of not quite fitting, of constantly adjusting, of building systems to make the world livable rather than simply inhabiting it. Or perhaps it reflects our long habit of looking outward toward the sky, wondering where we came from and where we're going. What matters most is not the answer, but the way the question slows us down. It invites us to see humanity not as the center of Earth's story, but as part of a much larger, older process. One that may involve migration, loss, adaptation, and forgetting on a cosmic scale. For most of us, the idea that Earth is home feels so obvious that it barely qualifies as an idea at all. It sits beneath thought, beneath debate, beneath curiosity. Earth is where humans live. Therefore, Earth is where humans belong. The logic feels airtight, circular in a way that provides comfort rather than concern. Home is where you are. Where else could it be? This assumption is learned early and reinforced constantly. Maps show continents as fixed backdrops to human history. Textbooks open with early humans walking across familiar landscapes, learning to hunt, to gather, to shape stone. Even when the story stretches back hundreds of thousands of years and never leaves the planet, Earth is the stage, the setting, the unquestioned constant. Humanity may change, but the ground beneath us remains the same. There is nothing wrong with this assumption. It is supported by enormous amounts of evidence. Fossils, genetics, archaeology, and geology all point to a long human story rooted here. But comfort and correctness are not the same thing as completeness. Some assumptions are so comfortable precisely because they are never pressed on. They work well enough that no one feels the need to examine their edges. The idea of Earth as home carries emotional weight as well as scientific weight. Home is not just a location, it is safety, familiarity, belonging. To suggest that Earth might not be our original home can feel oddly personal, even threatening, as if it undermines something fundamental about who we are. That reaction itself is worth noticing. Questions that provoke discomfort often reveal assumptions we didn't realize we were carrying. When we say Earth is our home, what exactly are we saying? Are we saying it is where our species originated biologically? Are we saying it is the environment to which we are best suited? Or are we simply saying it is where we have lived for as long as we can remember? These are related ideas, but they are not identical. Consider how the word home works in other contexts. A person can live somewhere for decades without being born there. A species can occupy a niche without having evolved within it. Plants and animals are introduced to new environments all the time. Some thrive, some struggle, some reshape entire ecosystems. Over time, they adapt, and future generations forget that they were ever newcomers. Human history itself is full of movement. Our ancestors migrated constantly. They crossed deserts, mountains, and oceans. They settled in climates wildly different from those of their origins. For many populations, the place called home today is not the place their ancestors first lived. And yet, after enough generations, that distinction fades. Home becomes wherever life unfolds now. On a planetary scale, the same logic could apply. If humanity arrived on Earth long enough ago, adaptation and memory loss could erase the sense of arrival entirely. Home would no longer feel borrowed. It would feel earned, inherited, unquestionable. Part of what makes the assumption of Earth as home so comfortable is how well we have learned to function here. We farm, build, travel, and communicate across the planet. We have reshaped landscapes, diverted rivers, and altered the atmosphere itself. That level of influence creates the impression of belonging. It feels intuitive to assume that a species capable of transforming its environment so thoroughly must have originated there. But influence is not the same as fit. In fact, influence often emerges when fit is imperfect. Humans do not simply live within Earth's ecosystems the way many species do. We manage them, control them, protect ourselves from them. Heat, cold, predators, pathogens, radiation, and scarcity are not things we blend into. They are things we mitigate. This is not a criticism of humanity. It is an observation. Humans are generalists. We survive by flexibility rather than specialization. Our bodies are not optimized for a single environment. Our strength lies in cognition, cooperation, and tool use. That strategy allows us to inhabit nearly any environment, but it also means we are rarely at ease without assistance. Even in mild climates, we rely on shelter and clothing. Our skin burns under prolonged sunlight. Our teeth struggle with modern diets. Childbirth is unusually risky compared to many mammals due to pelvic structure and brain size. Our sleep cycles are sensitive to light. Our immune systems overreact or underreact in ways that cause chronic disease. Again, none of this implies an extraterrestrial origin. Evolution produces compromise and imperfection everywhere. But it does complicate the simple idea that Earth fits us effortlessly. Comfort, in our case, is constructed. The assumption that Earth is home also rests on a quiet belief that origin and belonging must align. We assume that because we came from here, we must belong here. And because we belong here, we must have come from here. But nature does not always follow that symmetry. Species can originate in one environment and flourish in another. Belonging can be retrospective rather than original. There is also a temporal bias built into our thinking. We tend to assume that if something is true now, it must have always been true. Earth is humanity's home now. Therefore, it has always been so. But the universe is old, and memory is short. Geological time makes human history look like a brief flicker. Even evolutionary time is tiny compared to cosmic time. If humanity's story included an earlier chapter that did not unfold on Earth, the distance between then and now could be vast enough to swallow all direct evidence. The absence of memory would not be surprising. It would be expected. One reason this idea feels so speculative is that we are accustomed to thinking of Earth as unique. It is our only known cradle of life, the only place we know for certain that biology has flourished. But as astronomy advances, that uniqueness is becoming less absolute. Thousands of exoplanets have been discovered. Many exist in habitable zones. Some appear to have atmospheres, water, and stable orbits. Earth may be special, but it is unlikely to be singular. And if life can arise elsewhere, then the idea that it might travel, adapt, and migrate becomes less far-fetched. On long enough timescales, movement may be more common than permanence. The comfortable assumption of Earth as home also shapes how we interpret evidence. Fossils found here are assumed to represent local origin. Genetic diversity is traced backward to African populations, and rightly so. But genetics tells us where recent common ancestors lived, not necessarily where a lineage first emerged in the deepest sense. Bottlenecks, migrations, and extinctions can reset genetic clocks. Imagine a population arriving on Earth and passing through a severe bottleneck, leaving only a small number of survivors. Over time, genetic diversity would reflect that bottleneck rather than the deeper past. The story would appear to begin there, even if it did not. This kind of scenario is familiar in evolutionary biology. Many species show genetic signatures of bottlenecks caused by climate events or habitat loss. Their earlier history is effectively erased. We accept this readily for other organisms. We are less willing to imagine it for ourselves. There is also a psychological comfort in believing Earth is our only home. It places humanity firmly within a narrative of gradual emergence, of belonging to the planet's story rather than arriving late to it. It reinforces a sense of natural order. We evolved here, therefore we are part of Earth in a fundamental way. But belonging does not require origin. Adoption, migration, and refuge are also forms of belonging. A place can become home through survival, care, and memory. Even if it was not the beginning, It's worth noticing how often science fiction plays with this discomfort. Stories of humans discovering that they came from elsewhere, or that Earth was a colony or refuge, resonate not because they are believable, but because they touch something unresolved. They destabilize identity in a way that feels strangely familiar, even without leaving Earth. Humans often experience a sense of not quite fitting. We struggle with our environments, with our bodies, with each other. We create cultures, belief systems, and technologies to compensate for that struggle. One could argue that this is simply the human condition, but one could also wonder whether that condition includes a forgotten displacement. The assumption that Earth is home also affects how we view the planet itself. We often treat Earth as something to be mastered or managed, rather than something we are seamlessly part of. That attitude may stem from intelligence and dominance, but it could also reflect a deeper sense of separateness. Indigenous cultures around the world often describe a different relationship with Earth, one of kinship rather than ownership. Interestingly, many of these cultures also preserve stories of origin that are not strictly geological. Humans emerge from the sky, from other realms, from ancestors who travel great distances. These stories are symbolic, but symbolism often encodes emotional truths. Perhaps the most important thing to recognize is that questioning the assumption of Earth as home does not require rejecting science. It requires expanding the frame. It asks us to distinguish between what we know with confidence and what we assume, because it feels natural. Science thrives on uncomfortable questions. Many foundational discoveries began by challenging assumptions that seemed obvious at the time. The Earth was assumed to be the center of the universe. Time was assumed to be absolute. Continents were assumed to be fixed. In each case, the assumption was reasonable, given the available perspective. In each case, it turned out to be incomplete. That does not mean every assumption is wrong. It means every assumption is provisional. If Earth were not humanity's original home, that fact would not diminish our connection to this planet. It might even deepen it. Home, in that case, would not be a matter of origin, but of survival and continuity. Earth would be the place that took us in, shaped us, and allowed us to become what we are now. And even if Earth is our original home, sitting with the question helps us see how much of our certainty rests on habit rather than reflection. It reminds us that familiarity can masquerade as truth. When we ask where humanity comes from, the question quietly depends on something we rarely pause to define. What exactly do we mean when we say humanity? The word feels self-evident. It seems to point directly at us, at our faces, our voices, our shared experiences. But from a scientific perspective, and especially in the context of origins, the term is far less precise than it appears. Before we can ask where humanity began, we need to slow down and look carefully at what we are actually referring to. At its simplest, humanity means Homo sapiens, a species defined by anatomy, genetics, and evolutionary lineage. This definition is neat, measurable, and useful. It allows scientists to draw boundaries, compare fossils, sequence DNA, and trace descent. But even this clarity begins to blur the moment we look more closely. Homo sapiens did not appear in isolation. We emerged within a broader family of hominins, many of whom shared traits we once believed were uniquely ours. Neanderthals used tools, controlled fire, buried their dead, and possibly created symbolic objects. Denisven known primarily through genetic traces, contributed DNA to modern human populations and adapted to extreme environments. Other hominins, like Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis, showed evidence of planning, cooperation, and long-distance migration. The boundary between human and not human becomes less like a line and more like a gradient. This raises an immediate question. When we say humanity, do we mean only anatomically modern humans, or do we include our close relatives? If the latter, then humanity is not a single species, but a cluster of related beings who shared cognitive and behavioral traits over long periods of time. In that case, humanity becomes less of a fixed category and more of an evolving pattern. Patterns matter because they shift how we think about origin. A single species might have a single birthplace. A pattern of behavior, cognition, and social complexity could emerge in stages across environments and possibly across worlds. The more we define humanity by what we do rather than how we look, the more flexible the idea of origin becomes. Consider intelligence. Human intelligence is often treated as the defining feature of humanity. Yet, intelligence itself is not a single trait. It includes language, abstraction, empathy, planning, imagination, and self-awareness. These capacities did not all appear at once. They developed unevenly, influenced by environment, social structure, and survival pressures. If humanity is defined by intelligence, then at what point does humanity begin? With the first stone tools, with the first symbolic markings, with the first spoken language, with the first awareness of death? Each answer draws the starting line in a different place. Now consider culture. Humans are cultural beings. We inherit knowledge, beliefs, skills, and norms from previous generations. Culture allows us to adapt far faster than biology alone. But culture leaves a fragile trail. It depends on memory, communication, and continuity. Cultural breaks can erase entire ways of life in a short time. If humanity's origin involved a significant disruption, a migration, a collapse, or a population bottleneck, cultural continuity might have been lost even if biological continuity remained. In that case, the humanity we recognize today could be a reassembly rather than a beginning. There is also the question of embodiment. Humanity is tied to a specific body plan: bipedal, large brains, dexterous hands, vocal anatomy suited for speech. But bodies adapt over long periods. Morphology responds to gravity, atmosphere, diet, and radiation. If humans or human ancestors originated in a different environment, their bodies would have changed as they adapted to Earth. What would remain consistent is not the exact shape of the body, but the underlying organizational principles, a nervous system capable of high-level integration, social cognition, tool use, communication. These are not tied to a single skeletal structure. They are strategies. Strategies can migrate. When scientists search for life elsewhere, they do not look for exact replicas of Earth organisms. They look for patterns, chemical signatures, and structures that suggest metabolism, replication, and information processing. In the same way, defining humanity by exact physical form may be too narrow when thinking about deep origin. Another layer of complexity comes from genetics. Modern humans share a remarkable degree of genetic similarity, yet we also carry traces of interbreeding with other hominins. Our genome is a mosaic. It reflects mixing, adaptation, and survival rather than purity or isolation. This genetic blending suggests that humanity, as we know it, is the product of convergence rather than a single linear line. Multiple populations contributed traits that proved useful. Over time, those traits accumulated and stabilized. If that process happened entirely on Earth, it is already complex. If any part of it involved populations arriving from elsewhere, adapting and blending, the genetic picture would look similar. Mixture erases clear beginnings. It is also worth noting how recent the idea of a single unified humanity is. For most of history, humans divided themselves into tribes, clans, nations, and specific categories that excluded others. The scientific concept of a shared human lineage is relatively new. It emerged alongside genetics and evolutionary theory. This matters because our intuitive sense of humanity is shaped by culture as much as by biology. We think of humanity as a coherent whole because modern science tells us we are. But if we place ourselves earlier in time, that coherence dissolves. Humanity would not have recognized itself as such. It would have experienced itself as scattered groups struggling to survive. In that fragmented context, origin stories would not be global. They would be local, incomplete, and often contradictory. Over time, as populations merged and expanded, those stories would blur and fade. Language adds another layer. Human language is uniquely flexible and symbolic, but it leaves no fossil record. We infer its emergence indirectly through artifacts and anatomy. If early humans lost language complexity during a population collapse and later redeveloped it, the archaeological record might show a sudden leap that masks a deeper past. That possibility becomes especially interesting when we observe how quickly children acquire language. The capacity is deeply embedded. It does not require slow training over generations. It unfolds rapidly when conditions allow. That suggests language readiness could persist even if language itself were temporarily lost. Now consider self-awareness. Humans think about themselves thinking. We tell stories about our origins. We wonder where we belong. That reflective capacity is central to what we call humanity. But self-awareness does not require a specific planet. It requires complexity, continuity, and a certain threshold of neural integration. If humanity is defined by self-awareness, then humanity exists wherever that threshold is crossed. Earth would be one location where that happened, but not necessarily the first. At this point, it becomes clear that humanity is not a single thing. It is a layered concept. It includes biology, cognition, culture, memory, and continuity. Depending on which layer we emphasize, the question of origin shifts. If humanity is purely biological, then fossils and genetics are the final word. If humanity is cognitive and cultural, then gaps in the record become more significant. If humanity is a pattern of organization, then origin becomes a question of where that pattern first stabilized, not where it currently exists. None of this argues that humanity came from elsewhere, but it does show that the question is more subtle than it first appears. We're not asking where a skeleton was assembled. We're asking where a way of being took shape. There is also a philosophical tension worth acknowledging. Humans often seek singular beginnings, a first moment, a first place, a clear origin. This desire is psychological as much as scientific. Singular origins feel orderly. They provide narrative closure. But nature does not always cooperate with narrative neatness. Rivers do not begin at a single drop. They form from networks of streams. Species do not appear fully formed. They emerge from populations, pressures, and chance. Humanity, seen this way, may not have a single birthplace. It may have multiple roots converging over time. Earth may be one of those roots, or it may be the place where convergence finally reached stability. If Earth were not the original home of humanity, defining humanity narrowly would obscure that possibility. Defining it broadly keeps the question open. There is also an emotional aspect to this definition. Humanity includes vulnerability, creativity, fear, cooperation, and curiosity. These traits are not tied to geography. They are responses to existence itself. Wherever conscious beings grapple with survival, meaning, and connection, something like humanity emerges. This perspective does not strip humanity of its uniqueness. It reframes uniqueness as emergent rather than isolated. Humanity becomes something that arises when conditions align, not something guaranteed by location. For now, it is enough to notice that humanity is not as simple as a species label. It is a process, a pattern, a continuity shaped by adaptation and memory. And once we see humanity that way, the idea that Earth might not be the very beginning becomes less shocking and more quietly plausible. Not as a claim, but as a possibility worth holding gently as the story continues to unfold. Long before humans wrote history in dates and measurements, they explained themselves through stories. These stories were not concerned with accuracy in the modern sense. They were not meant to preserve timelines or biological detail. Instead, they were attempts to make sense of existence itself, of where people came from, why the world looked the way it did, and how humans fit within something much larger than themselves. What makes these stories interesting for our question is not whether they are literally true, but the patterns they share across cultures, separated by oceans, languages, and thousands of years. When ancient societies asked where humans came from, they rarely described a slow emergence from soil, water, or gradual change. Instead, they often spoke of arrival. Humans descended. Humans were brought. Humans came down from the sky, crossed over from another realm, or were placed on the earth after some distant event. Again and again, the language of movement appears, not the language of spontaneous origin. In many Mesopotamian traditions, humans are described as being created by gods who already existed elsewhere. These gods did not emerge from Earth. They came from the heavens. Humanity's role was defined after their arrival, often as caretakers, workers, or stewards in a world already shaped. The story does not place humanity as a natural outgrowth of the planet, but as something introduced into it. The Sumerian texts speak of the Anuna, beings who descended from the sky to establish order. Humans appear later, shaped with purpose and instruction. Whether one reads these stories symbolically or metaphorically, the directionality matters. The story flows downward, not outward. Humanity enters a stage that already exists. Ancient Egyptian mythology follows a similar pattern. The gods emerge from the primordial waters, but humanity is not portrayed as slowly forming from Earth itself. Humans are fashioned, guided, and ruled by beings who move between sky and land. Pharaohs are described as intermediaries, not merely rulers of Earth, but bridges between worlds. Humanity's identity is framed relationally, not locally. In Hindu cosmology, the cycles of creation and destruction stretch across immense spans of time. Humans appear within these cycles, but rarely as the first or only intelligent beings. There are higher realms, celestial beings, and prior ages where different forms of life existed. Humanity is not central to the beginning. It enters during a particular phase under particular conditions. The idea of descent is explicit in many indigenous traditions as well. Among certain Native American cultures, humans emerge from previous worlds, climbing upward or downward through layers of reality. The Hopes speak of multiple worlds that existed before this one, each ending in catastrophe, with survivors guided to the next. Earth, in this view, is not the first home, but the latest. In Mesoamerican traditions, particularly among the Mir, humans are created after several failed attempts. Earlier beings are destroyed, replaced, refined. Humanity arrives as the successful version, shaped deliberately rather than emerging naturally. The gods are older than Earth's current form, and humans are latecomers. These stories are often dismissed as creation myths, grouped together and set aside as pre-scientific explanations. But doing so flattens their nuance. Many of these myths are not really about creation at all. They're about transition, about movement from one state to another, about survival after collapse. The recurring theme is not "we grew here," but "we came here." Even in ancient Greek mythology, humanity's origin is complicated. Prometheus fashions humans, but they exist within a cosmos populated by titans, gods, and primordial forces that predate them. Humans are given fire, knowledge, and instruction. They are not self-originating, they are recipients. The Greek myth of the Golden Age describes a time when humans lived differently, closer to the gods, before decline set in. Humanity is portrayed as something that changes, degrades, adapts, not as something fixed in place. In Norse mythology, humans are created from driftwood found on the shore. This is a subtle but interesting image. Driftwood does not originate where it is found. It arrives from elsewhere, shaped by long journeys through water. The first humans are literally made from objects that have traveled. In ancient Chinese mythology, humanity is shaped by Nu after a great catastrophe. Again, humans are not the first occupants of existence. They're created in response to imbalance. The world changes, and humans are introduced to restore order. Across Africa, origin stories vary widely, but many include humans descending from the sky, emerging after divine action, or being brought into the world rather than growing out of it. The Zulu speak of humans emerging from reeds after being sent by Unulu. The emphasis is on emergence into a prepared world. What is striking is not any single myth, but the pattern across them. Independent cultures with no contact repeatedly imagine humanity as something that arrives into a world shaped by forces older than itself. This does not prove anything about literal origin, but it tells us something about how humans intuitively understand themselves. Perhaps arrival feels more accurate than origin, because humans have always experienced themselves as inheritors. We are born into languages we did not invent, cultures we did not design, and ecosystems we did not create. We arrive into lives already in motion. There is also the matter of catastrophe. Many myths include floods, fires, skyfalls, or collapses that reset the world. Humanity survives or is reintroduced afterward. These stories could reflect real environmental events like ice ages or massive floods. But they also preserve the idea that humanity has endured transitions, that it has been displaced before. If humanity had experienced a planetary-scale displacement in its deep past, that experience would almost certainly be mythologized rather than remembered literally. Memory does not preserve technical detail, over vast time scales. It preserves meaning, emotion, and structure. Arrival would become descent. Migration would become creation. Survival would become divine intervention. Another recurring element is instruction. In many myths, humans are taught how to live by beings who come from elsewhere. Agriculture, law, writing, astronomy, and medicine are gifts, not discoveries. The gods instruct humans how to exist in the world. This theme has often been interpreted as humans attributing their own innovations to divine sources. That interpretation makes sense, but it also aligns neatly with the idea of lost knowledge. If humanity had once possessed greater understanding and then lost it due to collapse or displacement, rediscovery might feel like instruction from ancestors or higher beings. There is also a persistent upward orientation in human symbolism. The sky is associated with origin, authority, and knowledge. Humans look up when asking fundamental questions. This may simply reflect the mystery of the heavens, or it may reflect a deeper intuition that origin lies above rather than beneath. Importantly, ancient myths rarely frame Earth as uniquely central. It is one realm among many. Heaven, underworlds, oceans, and other lands coexist. Humanity occupies a middle position, not the foundation. This contrasts sharply with modern assumptions. Today, Earth is often treated as the unquestioned cradle of humanity. The possibility that humans might be newcomers is rarely entertained outside of fiction. Ancient stories, by contrast, seem more open to that idea, even if they express it symbolically. It is also worth noting that ancient people were keen observers of the natural world. They tracked stars, seasons, and cycles with impressive precision. Their myths were not born of ignorance, but of interpretation. They used narrative to organize complex observations into meaningful structures. If early humans noticed that they were physically weaker than many animals, poorly adapted to climate extremes, and dependent on tools for survival, they might naturally wonder whether the world was made for them or whether they were adapting to it after the fact. Myths are one way that a question could be explored without language, for evolution or astronomy. Another important detail is how rarely myths describe humans evolving from animals. Transformation myths exist, but they are usually symbolic. Humans are distinct from animals in most origin stories. This separation could reflect cultural hierarchy, but it also reinforces the sense of discontinuity, of humans being something added rather than grown. Again, this does not mean ancient people believed humans came from another planet in a modern sense. It means that the intuitive story humans tell about themselves does not strongly favor gradual emergence from Earth alone. It favors arrival, instruction, and adaptation. As science advanced, these myths were set aside as metaphor, and that was appropriate. Literal readings of myths do not withstand scrutiny, but metaphor can still carry insight. Myths often preserve questions that science later formalizes. The question of whether Earth is humanity's original home is not answered by myths, but myths show that the idea of arrival is deeply embedded in human self. It did not emerge from science fiction. It existed long before telescopes or rockets. This suggests that the idea resonates with something experiential. Perhaps it reflects humanity's constant feeling of being slightly out of sync with the world, of needing to build, protect, and modify rather than simply exist. Or perhaps it reflects the trauma of repeated displacement encoded into story rather than memory. As we move forward, The myths do not serve as evidence. They serve as mirrors. They show us how humans have long perceived themselves not as static products of a place, but as travelers through conditions, adapting and surviving. Whether that travel ever crossed planetary boundaries is a question for science, not story. But the stories make one thing clear. The idea that humanity arrived rather than originated is not new. It is ancient, persistent, and woven quietly into the way humans have always tried to explain themselves. When you take a step back and look at the human body without sentiment, without pride, and without the comforting story that it was perfectly shaped for this planet, something curious begins to stand out. For a species that has lived on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years, we are oddly delicate here. Not helpless, not incapable, but fragile in ways that feel disproportionate to our intelligence and ambition. This fragility is easy to overlook because it is so familiar. Pain, injury, illness, and physical limitation are woven into everyday life so tightly that they feel normal rather than noteworthy. Most animals appear deeply at ease in their environments. Their bodies are specialized, efficient, and well matched to the conditions they face. Birds are lightweight and hollow-boned for flight. Fish extract oxygen effortlessly from water. Arctic mammals thrive in extreme cold without clothing or shelter. Even small insects tolerate radiation levels that would be lethal to humans. They do not need to reshape their surroundings to survive. They simply exist within them. Humans are different. We survive on Earth not by fitting neatly into its systems, but by constantly compensating for our shortcomings. Our bodies require constant maintenance, protection, and modification of the environment. Clothing, shelter, medicine, controlled diets, and artificial temperature regulation are not luxuries. They are necessities. Without them, our survival window narrows quickly. Take sunlight, for example. The sun is the fundamental energy source for life on Earth. Yet, prolonged exposure damages human skin. Ultraviolet radiation breaks down DNA, accelerates aging, and increases cancer risk. Many species have fur, feathers, pigmentation, or cellular repair mechanisms that offer far greater protection. Humans, by contrast, must shield themselves with clothing, shade, or artificial chemicals. Even our eyes are vulnerable, easily damaged by brightness or glare. Temperature presents a similar problem. The range of conditions in which humans can remain comfortable without assistance is surprisingly narrow. Too cold, and we risk hypothermia. Too hot, and we risk heat stroke. Sweating helps, but only under specific humidity conditions. We do not hibernate. We do not grow seasonal coats. We do not tolerate extremes well. We build fires, walls, roofs, and climate systems to compensate. Gravity, too, leaves its mark. The human spine is famously problematic. Lower back pain is so common that it is treated as an expected feature of adulthood. Our knees, hips, and ankles degrade under long-term load. Childbirth is unusually dangerous compared to most mammals, largely because our pelvis balances beep, walking with large brain size. The compromise is imperfect and the cost is high. Astronauts provide an interesting reference point here. In microgravity, human bodies lose bone density, muscle mass, and cardiovascular efficiency at alarming rates. This is often interpreted as proof that we evolved specifically for Earth's gravity, and that is reasonable. But it also highlights how tightly balanced our physiology is. Small changes push the system toward breakdown. We are not robust across a wide range of conditions. Some researchers have noted that slightly lower gravity might reduce joint strain, spinal compression, and cardiovascular stress. This is not a claim about origin. It is an observation about fit. Our bodies seem tuned to a narrow window, and even within that window, they struggle. Then there is diet. Humans are omnivores, which suggests flexibility, but our digestive system is sensitive. Many people experience intolerance to lactose, gluten, or other common foods. Our teeth decay easily. Our jaw structure has shrunk faster than our tooth count, leading to crowding and impacted wisdom teeth. We cook food not just for taste, but because raw diets are harder for us to process efficiently. Compare this to animals that eat the same thing every day for their entire lives without dental care or supplements. Again, humans manage through technology and culture rather than biological resilience. Sleep offers another example. Humans require long, regular sleep cycles to function properly. Disruption leads quickly to cognitive decline, emotional instability, and health problems. Artificial light easily interferes with our circadian rhythm. Shift work causes measurable long-term harm. We are deeply sensitive to timing, light exposure, and routine. This sensitivity is not shared equally across species. Many animals sleep in fragmented patterns. Some remain alert for days. Humans, by contrast, collapse quickly without structured rest. Our brains demand a very specific rhythm. Then there is disease. The human immune system is powerful, but also prone to overreaction. Autoimmune disorders, allergies, and inflammatory diseases are common. Our immune response sometimes attacks our own tissues or responds excessively to harmless stimuli. This suggests a system that is finely tuned, but not broadly tolerant. Evolutionary explanations exist for all of these traits. None of them are mysterious in isolation, but taken together, they paint a picture of a species that survives through intelligence rather than embodiment. We solve biological problems with external solutions. We invent tools to do what our bodies cannot. That strategy is enormously successful. It has allowed humans to spread across the planet and beyond. But it also raises a subtle question. Is this the strategy of a species that emerged perfectly suited to its environment, or of one that adapted quickly because it had to? It is tempting to say that intelligence itself is the adaptation, that humans evolved brains precisely because our bodies were not specialized. This is likely true to a degree, but specialization and intelligence are not mutually exclusive. Dolphins, elephants, and corvids show high intelligence alongside bodies well suited to their environments. Human intelligence stands out not just for its complexity, but for how early and heavily it becomes necessary for survival. Even primitive humans relied on tools, fire, and social structures. Naked, alone, and unassisted, a human fares poorly compared to most mammals of similar size. There is also the issue of radiation. Earth's magnetic field protects life from cosmic radiation, but it fluctuates. Solar storms and magnetic weakening pose risks. Humans have limited natural protection against radiation damage. Our cells accumulate mutations over time. Our lifespan reflects this vulnerability. If humanity had originated on a planet with stronger magnetic shielding or a thicker atmosphere, reduced radiation exposure might have shaped a different baseline. Earth's conditions would then require adjustment rather than seamless continuity. Another point worth considering is developmental fragility. Human infants are born extremely helpless. They require years of care before becoming independent. This is often explained by brain development, continuing after birth, but it also reflects a species that invests heavily in social structures to compensate for biological vulnerability. Many animals walk within minutes of birth. Humans take years. That dependence is not a flaw, but it is a notable feature. It ties survival tightly to culture, cooperation, and memory. The more one examines the human body, the more it appears as a system that works, but not effortlessly. It succeeds, but with strain. It endures, but with constant support. Again, this does not imply an extraterrestrial origin. Evolution frequently produces compromise, but the extent of compensation required is striking. It is also telling how quickly the human body falters when removed from controlled environments. Without medicine, minor injuries become deadly. Without clean water, disease spreads rapidly. Without shelter, exposure takes its toll. Our resilience depends heavily on infrastructure. Contrast this with animals that recover from injuries without intervention, drink untreated water, and sleep exposed to the elements. Humans can do these things briefly, but not reliably. One might argue that this fragility is the price of consciousness. A large brain demands energy, stability, and protection. That is true. But even accounting for this, humans remain unusually dependent on external aids. Now, imagine a scenario, purely hypothetical, where humanity originated in an environment that was gentler in certain ways: lower gravity, reduced radiation, more stable temperatures, fewer pathogens. In such a place, the human body might function with far less strain. Arrival on Earth would then require adaptation, cultural scaffolding, and technological solutions to offset harsher conditions. Over many generations, bodies would adjust somewhat. Bone density would increase, pigmentation would change, immune systems would recalibrate. But some mismatches might persist, especially if survival relied more on tools than on biological overhaul. This is not evidence, it is a lens. The strange fragility of the human body becomes more interesting when viewed not as a flaw, but as a clue to how humanity survives. We are builders not because we like to build, but because we must. We shape environments because unshaped environments challenge us. Earth is not hostile. It supports life abundantly, but it does not coddle humans. We have learned to live here through constant negotiation with its forces. Perhaps that negotiation is exactly what shaped humanity's psychology. A species always slightly out of balance might develop foresight, cooperation, and curiosity simply to stay alive. Intelligence becomes not a luxury, but a necessity. Whether Earth is our original home or not, the human body tells a story of adjustment rather than ease. It tells a story of survival through ingenuity rather than harmony. When we look for origins, we often look to bones. Fossils feel solid in a way stories and speculation do not. They sit in rock, measured, cataloged, dated. They give the impression of permanence, of evidence that cannot be argued with. And yet, the fossil record, for all its value, is not a complete archive. It is fragmentary, airy, uneven, and shaped as much by chance as by history. What survives is not a perfect record of what existed, but a small and selective sample of what happened to be preserved under very specific conditions. This is where the story of humanity becomes quietly complicated. Human fossils are rare. Even after more than a century of dedicated searching, the total number of hominin fossils is surprisingly small compared to the span of time they represent. A few fragments of skulls, partial skeletons, teeth, jawbones, scattered across continents, and separated by tens or hundreds of thousands of years. From these pieces, scientists have reconstructed a narrative of human evolution that is coherent, impressive, and deeply researched. But it is also stitched together across long stretches of missing information. Fossilization itself is an unlikely process. Most organisms die and decompose without leaving a trace. Bones are broken, scattered, eaten, dissolved by acidic soil, or eroded by water. For a fossil to form, remains must be buried quickly, protected from oxygen and scavengers, mineralized over time, and then exposed again in just the right way for discovery. Each step narrows the odds. The absence of fossils does not mean the absence of life. It means the absence of preservation. This matters because when we speak of gaps in the fossil record, we are not pointing to empty time in which nothing happened. We are pointing to time that simply did not leave durable traces. And human history, especially early human history, unfolded in environments that were not ideal for fossilization. Tropical regions, where many early humans lived, are particularly harsh on bones. Heat, moisture, and biological activity accelerate decay. Africa, widely accepted as the cradle of humanity, presents exactly these conditions. Rich ecosystems, active geology, and complex climates make fossil preservation difficult. It is entirely possible that large portions of our early story simply did not fossilize. Even within the fossils we do have, there are discontinuities that provoke quiet curiosity. Certain traits appear suddenly rather than gradually. Brain size increases rapidly over relatively short spans of time. Tool complexity jumps in bursts rather than smooth progression. Behavioral sophistication appears and disappears in ways that are still debated. One example often discussed is the emergence of anatomically modern humans. Homo sapiens appear in the fossil record with a suite of features that set them apart from earlier hominins. While there is evidence of gradual change, the overall impression is one of acceleration. Something shifts. Whether that shift reflects cognitive reorganization, social complexity, environmental pressure, or demographic change remains an open question. Another example involves migration. Fossils suggest that early humans left Africa earlier than once thought, possibly multiple times. Some populations appear, vanish, and reappear elsewhere. This pattern does not look like a single orderly expansion. It looks like movement, retreat, fragmentation, and re-expansion. There are also anatomical oddities. Some fossils show combinations of traits that do not fit neatly into existing categories. Mosaic evolution, where different features evolve at different rates, is well known, but it complicates classification. What exactly counts as human becomes harder to pin down when skulls show advanced faces with archaic brains or modern brains with primitive jaws. Then there is the matter of Denisovans. Known primarily through a few bone fragments and genetic traces, they left almost no skeletal record. Yet, they contributed DNA to large populations of modern humans. An entire group of humans existed, interacted, and vanished with barely any physical trace. Their story survived not in stone, but in living genomes. This alone should caution us against overconfidence in fossil completeness. If Denisovans had not interbred with Homo sapiens, we might not know they existed at all. Their absence from the fossil record would not reflect their insignificance, but the randomness of preservation. Now consider this question carefully. If an entire human population can exist, spread, and disappear with almost no fossil record, What else might be missing? The fossil record also tells us little about behavior. Bones do not speak of language, culture, belief, or memory. Tools offer some clues, but even tools decay, especially those made of wood, fiber, or organic materials. Stone tools survive because stone survives. That biases our understanding toward a narrow slice of human activity. Early humans almost certainly used materials that left no trace. Clothing, shelters, containers, and symbolic objects made from plant fibers or animal skins would vanish completely. A technologically sophisticated culture could leave remarkably little behind if its materials were biodegradable. This becomes particularly relevant when thinking about hypothetical scenarios of displacement or collapse. If a population experienced severe reduction, losing technology and infrastructure, what would remain after tens of thousands of years? Likely very little. Stone tools might persist, bones might not. The fossil record also compresses time. Thousands of years can be represented by a single specimen. Changes that took generations appear as sudden jumps. This can give the illusion of abrupt emergence or disappearance where none existed. For example, a new anatomical trait might appear in the fossil record, not because it evolved suddenly, but because a population carrying it expanded rapidly while others declined. Fossils record survivors, not transitions. This selective survival becomes even more important when considering environmental catastrophe. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and climate shifts have repeatedly reshaped Earth. Populations contract, migrate, or vanish. Genetic bottlenecks occur. Cultural knowledge is lost. Fossil records thin dramatically during these periods. If humanity experienced one or more severe bottlenecks, especially early on, our visible history could begin after those events, not before them. Earlier chapters would be invisible. Some researchers have pointed to the Toba super-eruption around 74,000 years ago as a possible bottleneck event. While its impact is debated, it highlights the vulnerability of early human populations. A global catastrophe could reduce humanity to a few thousand individuals. Survivors would carry only fragments of genetic and cultural history. From there, humanity would rebuild. Tools would be reinvented. Language would redevelop. Stories would form around survival rather than origin. The deeper past would become unreachable. Bones would tell only the story of those who lived after. This is where the fossil record becomes less a definitive answer and more a boundary. It shows us how far back we can see clearly, not how far back the story goes. There are also gaps in geographic distribution. Certain regions show long periods with no human fossils followed by sudden appearance. This is often explained by migration and settlement patterns, but it could also reflect preservation bias or episodic occupation. If humans arrived in a region briefly, failed to establish long-term populations, and moved on, their presence might leave no trace. Repeated across continents and millennia, such patterns could erase entire chapters. Another subtle point involves classification itself. Fossils are interpreted within frameworks that evolve over time. What was once classified as a separate species may later be folded into another. Interpretations shift as new evidence emerges. The story is refined but never final. This matters because our understanding of human origins is not static. It is shaped by current models which are themselves provisional. Gaps are not failures of science. They are reminders of humility. Now imagine extending this logic outward, not just backward. If humanity's deep past involved environments or contexts outside what we currently study, the fossil record would be silent. Fossils do not preserve information about places where fossilization did not occur or where remains were destroyed completely. If hypothetically, humanity originated in an environment where preservation was unlikely or where remains were lost entirely, the fossil record would begin only after relocation and adaptation. Again, this is not an assertion. It is an acknowledgement of limitation. The fossil record is powerful, but it is not omniscient. It tells us what survived, not everything that lived. It reveals structure, not full narrative. Scientists are keenly aware of this. Paleoanthropology is built on caution, revision, and debate. No serious researcher claims the record is complete. Instead, they work carefully within its constraints. What becomes interesting is how these constraints interact with our assumptions. If we assume Earth must be the original home of humanity, gaps are interpreted as missing links within that framework. If we loosen that assumption slightly, the same gaps become open-ended rather than problematic. Sudden appearances become moments of expansion rather than creation. Missing precursors become populations we have not found, rather than populations that never existed. There is also the matter of time depth. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years by current estimates. That is a long time in human terms, but short in cosmic terms. Life on Earth has existed for billions of years. Intelligent life elsewhere, if it exists, could be far older. If humanity's lineage includes earlier phases that do not map neatly onto Homo sapiens, fossils might not resemble what we expect. They might be misclassified, ignored, or misunderstood. Even within Earth's record, early hominin fossils were often dismissed or misinterpreted when first discovered because they did not fit existing expectations. Only later were they recognized as significant. This suggests caution in drawing firm boundaries around what counts as relevant evidence. Ultimately, bones and fossils are silent witnesses. They tell us that humans changed, moved, adapted, and survived. They do not tell us why certain paths were taken or what was lost along the way. The gaps in our story are not flaws to be patched. They are spaces where humility belongs. They remind us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when preservation is rare and chance-driven. When we trace humanity's story through stone tools, bones, and settlement patterns, the overall arc often appears gradual. Small changes accumulate, techniques improve, groups expand and adapt. Yet, embedded within that long arc are moments that feel different in character. Moments when something shifts, not slowly but abruptly. Intelligence seems to sharpen. Behavior reorganizes. New ways of thinking appear in a time frame that feels compressed when compared to everything that came before. These moments are not mysterious in the sense that they lack explanations, but they are puzzling in how concentrated they are. One of the most discussed examples is what is often called the Upper Paleolithic transition. Around 50,000 to 70,000 years ago, depending on the region, the archaeological record shows a noticeable change. Tools become more specialized and varied. Symbolic objects appear more frequently. There is evidence of art, personal ornamentation, long distance trade, and complex social organization. Burial practices suggest ritual and belief. Language, though invisible, is inferred to have reached a level of complexity capable of sustaining large, coordinated groups. Before this period, hominins were not unintelligent. They made tools, controlled fire, and cooperated socially. But something about this later phase looks different in scale and integration. It is not just more of the same. It is a reorganization of how intelligence expresses itself. The question is not whether this happened. It clearly did. The question is why it happened the way it did. One explanation is demographic. As populations grew larger and more connected, ideas spread more easily. Innovations no longer died with their creators. Cultural evolution accelerated. This is a compelling argument, and it is supported by models showing how population density can amplify creativity and retention. Another explanation focuses on genetics. Small mutations affecting brain development, neural connectivity, or vocal anatomy could have crossed critical thresholds. Once those thresholds were crossed, language and abstract thought could expand rapidly. Evolution does not always move at a constant pace. Sometimes it waits, and then it moves quickly. Environmental pressure is another factor. Climate fluctuations during this period were significant. Ice ages expanded and retreated. Resources shifted. Groups that adapted cognitively and socially would have had a strong advantage. Intelligence becomes not just useful, but essential. All of these explanations are plausible. None of them are mutually exclusive, and yet, even taken together, they leave a lingering sense that something about the timing is odd. The ingredients for intelligence were present long before the apparent explosion of behavior. Large brains existed, tool use existed, social living existed. Why did the transformation not unfold earlier and more gradually? This question becomes more interesting when we consider that similar leaps appear more than once. There are periods of apparent advancement followed by stagnation or even regression. Some early human sites show sophisticated behavior that does not seem to continue uninterrupted. Knowledge appears, disappears, and later reappears. This pattern challenges the idea of a simple upward trajectory. Instead, it suggests that human intelligence and culture are fragile. They require certain conditions to persist. When those conditions break down, complexity can be lost. This is not speculation. We see it historically. Civilizations collapse. Writing is forgotten. Technologies vanish. Entire bodies of knowledge can disappear within a few generations if they are not actively maintained. The so-called Dark Ages in Europe illustrate this on a relatively small time scale. On a prehistoric time scale, the effect would be far more pronounced. If humanity experienced repeated bottlenecks, collapses, or migrations, it is possible that intelligence did not steadily accumulate, but rather surged, fractured, and reassembled multiple times. This leads to an uncomfortable but intriguing thought. What if some of the sudden leaps we observe are not the first appearance of certain capacities, but their reemergence? What if complex cognition existed earlier, was partially lost, and later resurfaced when conditions allowed? The fossil record cannot answer this directly. Intelligence does not fossilize. We infer it from tools, art, and behavior, and those inferences are constrained by preservation. Organic materials, language, music, and teaching methods leave little to no trace. A group could possess sophisticated oral knowledge, navigational skills, and social organization without leaving behind durable artifacts. If such a group collapsed, its intelligence would vanish from the record almost entirely. There is also the question of neural potential. Modern human brains develop remarkably quickly. Children acquire language without formal instruction. Abstract thought emerges spontaneously when social conditions allow. This suggests that much of our intelligence is latent, waiting for the right triggers. If that is true, then sudden leaps may reflect environmental unlocking rather than genetic invention. The capacity was already there. It simply expressed itself differently under new circumstances. This idea aligns with observations from modern contexts. When previously isolated populations gain access to education, nutrition, and social stability, cognitive performance changes rapidly. The brain adapts within a generation. Intelligence does not need to evolve biologically to reorganize itself behaviorally. Now consider how this applies to deep time. If humanity arrived on Earth with a cognitive architecture already capable of high abstraction, but was forced into survival mode by unfamiliar conditions, intelligence might initially express itself narrowly. Tool use would be practical rather than symbolic. Social structures would be small and defensive. Over time, as adaptation occurred, cognitive expression could expand rapidly, giving the impression of a sudden leap. Again, this is not a claim. It is a way of interpreting the same data through a different lens. Another aspect worth examining is the apparent asymmetry between anatomical and behavioral change. In some periods, anatomy remains relatively stable, while behavior shifts dramatically. Brain size does not increase significantly, yet cultural complexity does. This suggests that raw brain volume is not the limiting factor. Instead, organization, connectivity, and usage patterns matter more. Neural rewiring can occur within a lifetime. Cultural practices shape cognition. Teaching reshapes brains. If intelligence were purely a slow genetic process, we would expect closer alignment between anatomical change and behavioral change. The mismatch suggests something more dynamic. There is also the matter of symbolic behavior. The appearance of art, music, and ritual marks a significant shift. These activities are not directly tied to survival. They reflect meaning-making, identity, and shared imagination. Why would such behaviors appear when they do? One explanation is social cohesion. Larger groups require shared symbols to maintain trust and cooperation. Ritual binds people together. Another explanation is psychological. Humans seek meaning, especially under stress. Symbolic behavior may arise in response to uncertainty and loss. If humanity experienced displacement or existential threat, symbolic systems could emerge rapidly as a way of coping and organizing experience. In that context, art and ritual are not luxuries. They are stabilizing tools. This interpretation becomes even more compelling when we consider how often symbolic behavior appears after disruption. Post-collapse societies often produce rich mythologies. Trauma generates narrative. Sudden leaps in behavior may therefore reflect not evolutionary novelty, but adaptive response to upheaval. The question then becomes, upheaval from what? Environmental change is one answer. Migration into new territories is another. Encounter with other hominin groups could also catalyze innovation. Competition and exchange drive creativity. But there is also the possibility of internal upheaval, loss of prior structures, forgetting, and rediscovery. A reset that forces intelligence to rebuild itself in new forms. One of the more curious observations is how quickly humans become technologically sophisticated once basic needs are met. Agriculture appears independently in multiple regions within a relatively narrow window of time. Writing emerges in several places without clear diffusion. Mathematics, astronomy, and architecture arise again and again. This convergence suggests that human intelligence has preferred modes of expression. Given similar conditions, it produces similar outcomes. If humanity had a deeper cognitive history that was disrupted, these convergences might represent a kind of reassembly. Different groups, starting from different places, rediscover similar solutions because they share underlying mental structures. This is not fundamentally different from how children reinvent language-like systems when deprived of input. The brain fills in gaps. The idea that intelligence can be lost and regained is uncomfortable because it challenges the narrative of steady progress. It suggests fragility rather than inevitability. It implies that what we call modern behavior is not guaranteed. Yet, history supports this discomfort. Progress is not linear. It oscillates. When viewed this way, sudden leaps become less mysterious. They are not miracles. They're recoveries or accelerations triggered by alignment of conditions. Still, there is something distinctive about the scale of human intelligence compared to other species. No other animal reorganizes its environment so thoroughly. No other species accumulates knowledge across generations to the same degree. This uniqueness raises another quiet question. If intelligence of this magnitude is so rare, why did it emerge here, and only once, and in such a compressed window? Evolutionary explanations exist, but they often rely on contingent events. A mutation here, a climate shift there, a lucky alignment. Contingency is real. But when contingency produces something this transformative, it invites curiosity about deeper context. If humanity were part of a longer lineage of intelligent life, with Earth representing a later stage rather than the beginning, then the rapid flowering of intelligence would make more intuitive sense. The groundwork would already exist. Once again, this is not evidence. It is coherence. It is noticing that certain interpretations sit more comfortably with the data than others, depending on what assumptions we bring. The mainstream scientific view remains that human intelligence evolved entirely on Earth. That view is supported by genetics, comparative anatomy, and evolutionary theory. Nothing discussed here contradicts that. What it does is highlight that within that framework, there are still unanswered questions about timing, expression, and fragility. Sudden leaps in intelligence and behavior are not anomalies to be explained away. They are signals. They tell us that intelligence is not a simple accumulation of traits, but a dynamic system sensitive to environment, memory, and disruption. As we move forward, this sensitivity will matter, because intelligence does not develop in isolation. It develops in relationship to surroundings. And one of the most persistent features of human intelligence is where it looks when it asks questions. Long before humans learned how to shape stone into tools or track seasons with calendars, they were already looking upward. The sky did not need to be explained to demand attention. It changed constantly, yet predictably. It glowed, darkened, moved, and returned. It offered light, warning, rhythm, and mystery. For early humans, the sky was not a background. It was an active presence, impossible to ignore and impossible to touch. This fixation is so ancient and so universal that it often escapes notice. Every culture that has ever existed has watched the sky, not casually, but carefully. Stars were named, patterns were traced, movements were memorized, stories were told, not just about the land beneath people's feet, but about what hovered endlessly above them. The sky became a reference point for time, direction, meaning, and origin. What makes this obsession unusual is not that humans notice the sky, but how deeply they integrated it into their understanding of themselves. Animals respond to the sky instinctively. Birds migrate by it. Insects navigate by polarized light. But humans went further. They asked what it meant. They connected it to who they were and where they came from. The earliest known human structures with clear, intentional design are often aligned with celestial events. Stone circles, burial mounds, temples, and monuments across the world reflect careful observation of solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, and star positions. These alignments were not accidental. They required long-term observation, shared knowledge, and deliberate construction. This level of investment suggests that the sky was not merely useful, it was important. Consider Stonehenge, often reduced to a tourist image, but still one of the clearest examples of prehistoric astronomical attention. Its stones align with the rising sun on the summer solstice and the setting sun on the winter solstice. This alignment required generations of observation and coordination. The people who built it were not writing books or building cities, yet they tracked the sky with precision. Similar structures appear elsewhere. Göbekli, older than agriculture, contains carved symbols that many researchers believe relate to celestial observation. The pyramids of Egypt align with cardinal directions and star patterns. In Mesoamerica, pyramids and observatories track Venus, the Sun, and the Moon with astonishing accuracy. These societies were separated by time and distance. They did not share language, technology, or direct contact. Yet they all turned their attention upward in remarkably similar ways. Why? One practical answer is survival. The sky governs seasons, weather, and migration patterns. Understanding it helps with agriculture, hunting, and navigation. This is true, but practicality alone does not explain the symbolic weight the sky carries in human culture. The sky is not just measured, it is personified. Deities live there, ancestors ascend there, souls return there, creation originates there. Across cultures, the heavens are associated with authority, knowledge, and beginnings. This upward orientation is so consistent that it begins to feel instinctive. Humans look to the sky when asking fundamental questions. Even modern language reflects this. We speak of higher truths, elevated ideas, and lofty goals. We look up when thinking, when pleading, when hoping. This raises an interesting point. Humans do not look to the earth in the same way when asking where they come from. The ground is associated with burial, not origin. The sky is associated with beginnings. That symbolic pattern predates science by tens of thousands of years. It is tempting to dismiss this as metaphor. Humans see the sky as mysterious, so they project meaning onto it. But symbolism often emerges from experience. The question becomes, what experience shaped this symbolism so consistently? Early humans lived under open skies. Without artificial light, the night sky would have been overwhelming in its clarity. Thousands of stars visible, the Milky Way stretching across the darkness, planets moving against fixed backgrounds, eclipses, comets, meteor showers. These events were dramatic, unpredictable, and powerful. They would naturally inspire awe and fear. But aura alone does not explain why humans associated the sky with origin rather than destruction. Lightning and storms are frightening, yet the sky is remembered as a place of descent, guidance, and creation more often than annihilation. Another factor is permanence. The land changes, rivers shift, Forests burn, ice advances and retreats, but the sky appears stable. Stars return night after night in the same patterns. Even without understanding astronomy, early humans could sense that the sky followed rules. That reliability may have given it authority. What is stable feels older. What is older feels foundational. Still, there is something more specific in the way humans relate the sky to themselves. Many myths do not simply place gods in the sky. They place human origin there. Humans are said to descend, fall, or be sent down. The direction matters. If humans had always felt fully at home on Earth, fully rooted in its cycles, it would be just as natural to imagine origin emerging upward from the ground. Plants grow upward. Animals emerge from nests, dens, and burrows. Yet, human stories rarely take this form. Instead, Earth is often portrayed as a place humans inhabit after creation, not the source of creation itself. This distinction becomes even more interesting when we consider navigation. Humans are exceptional navigators. Long before compasses, they crossed oceans using stars. Polynesian navigators memorized complex star maps, wave patterns, and celestial cues to travel vast distances with precision. They trusted the sky with their lives. Trust implies familiarity, not casual familiarity, but deep, practiced understanding. The sky was not distant, it was engaged with daily. This engagement continues today in subtler forms, even in modern societies, saturated with artificial light and screens. Humans remain fascinated by space. Space exploration captures imagination. Astronauts are cultural icons. The search for extraterrestrial life is treated with seriousness and excitement. People feel something when they see images of Earth from space. A sense of perspective, fragility, connection. The sky continues to shape identity. One could argue that this obsession is simply curiosity. Humans are curious beings. We explore. We ask questions. The sky is the biggest question of all. But curiosity is selective. Humans do not invest equal fascination in all mysteries. There is something about the sky that resonates more deeply than most. The possibility that this resonance reflects memory, even distorted memory, is uncomfortable, but worth examining carefully. If humanity had experienced a time when the sky was not just above, but around, when survival depended on understanding environments beyond Earth, that experience could imprint itself culturally long after literal memory faded. This does not require spacecraft or advanced technology in the modern sense. It could involve migration between environments under conditions we no longer recognize. Over deep time, experiences compress into archetypes. Even without such scenarios, the sky represents escape. Earth binds. Gravity holds. The sky offers distance. Humans imagine leaving Earth long before they can. Flight appears in myths long before it becomes real. Wings, ladders, chariots of fire. The desire to rise is ancient. That desire may reflect limitation. Humans feel constrained by Earth in ways other animals do not. We cannot fly. We cannot breathe underwater. We cannot see far. We imagine escape because we feel confined. But escape from what? Danger? Ignorance? Mortality? Or simply gravity? The earliest human art includes not just animals and handprints, but abstract symbols that some researchers believe relate to lunar cycles and star patterns. These marks are not decorative in a casual sense. They encode information. They reflect attention. Even burial practices reflect sky orientation. Bodies aligned with cardinal directions. Tombs oriented toward sunrise. The dead are positioned in relation to celestial events, as if the sky plays a role in what comes next. This suggests that the sky was not just observed, but integrated into beliefs about life and death. If humanity had arrived on Earth under conditions where the sky represented home or origin, those associations could persist long after literal understanding was lost. The sky would remain meaningful, even as its original context faded. Alternatively, if humans simply evolved here, the sky obsession could reflect something else entirely. Perhaps it reflects the human mind's need for scale. The sky offers something larger than the self. It relativizes personal concerns. It invites humility. Both interpretations are possible. Neither requires dismissing the other. What matters is recognizing that the sky has always occupied a special place in human thought, not just as an object of study, but as a reference point for identity. Even scientific language retains this orientation. We speak of higher dimensions, elevated perspectives, cosmic origins. We search for answers by looking outward. When humans finally left Earth physically and looked back at it from space, the emotional response was profound. Astronauts describe a cognitive shift, a sense of unity and fragility known as the overview effect. Seeing Earth as a small object in a vast sky changes how humans see themselves. That reaction is telling. It suggests that the sky is not foreign. It is familiar in a way that feels deeply personal. If Earth were humanity's unquestioned and original home, perhaps the sky would feel less intimate. It might feel distant, cold, irrelevant, but it does not. It feels connected. The obsession with the sky is not fading. If anything, it is intensifying. Telescopes grow more powerful. Missions reach farther. We search for habitable worlds. We listen for signals. We imagine futures beyond Earth. This persistence hints at something unresolved. Humans do not seem content to remain grounded indefinitely. We build stories and technologies that point upward. Whether this reflects destiny, curiosity, or forgotten displacement remains open. But the pattern itself is undeniable. When humans began to look beyond the sky and towards specific worlds within it, certain names kept returning again and again: Mars, Venus. Long before telescopes revealed their surfaces, these planets occupied a privileged place in human imagination. They were not just lights wandering among the stars. They were neighbors, distinct, named, characterized, given personalities, stories, tempers, and histories. Out of all the countless points of light overhead, these worlds felt closer, more relevant, more involved in the human fate. This is not an accident of modern science. It predates it by millennia. Mars and Venus are visible to the naked eye. They do not twinkle like stars. They move. They brighten and dim. They reverse direction. To ancient observers, this behavior marked them as different, as actors rather than background. They were not fixed. They wandered much like humans themselves. Venus, brilliant and luminous, appears at dawn and dusk. It arrives before the sun and lingers after it sets. Across cultures, Venus is associated with birth, beauty, fertility, and renewal. It is a herald, a transition marker between night and day. It does not rule the sky. It announces change. Mars, by contrast, glows red. Its motion is erratic. At times it slows, reverses, and resumes its path. Ancient astronomers struggled to explain this behavior. Myths followed. Mars became associated with disruption, conflict, heat, and danger. It was not gentle, it was unstable. These symbolic roles emerged long before humans knew anything about planetary atmospheres, temperatures, or geology. And yet, in hindsight, they are strangely fitting. Modern science tells us that both Mars and Venus were once very different worlds. Venus, now a furnace with crushing atmospheric pressure and surface temperatures hot enough to melt lead, may once have been far more temperate. Some models suggest that early Venus could have had oceans, mild temperatures, and a stable climate for billions of years. Its proximity to the Sun would not necessarily have doomed it early on. With different atmospheric conditions, it might have remained habitable far longer than once assumed. Mars, now cold, dry, and exposed to radiation, almost certainly had deep liquid water on its surface. River valleys, lake beds, deltas, and minerals formed in the presence of water cover its terrain. Mars once had a thicker atmosphere and a magnetic field that protected it from solar radiation. It was not always the barren desert we see today. These are not speculative ideas. They are grounded in planetary science. Mars and Venus were not born dead. They changed. This fact alone reshapes how we think about habitability. Planets are not static. They evolve. They lose atmospheres. They overheat. They freeze. Worlds that support life can become hostile. Worlds that are hostile can become temporary refuge. Now imagine intelligent life arising on one of these worlds during its habitable phase. Not humans as we know them, but something ancestral, something capable of cognition, memory, culture, and technology at some level. Over long time scales, that life would adapt to its planet's conditions, just as life on Earth did. Then imagine those conditions deteriorating. Mars lost its magnetic field. Without it, solar wind stripped away its atmosphere. Water evaporated or froze. Radiation increased. Surface conditions became increasingly hostile. If life existed there, survival would become difficult, then impossible. Venus experienced the opposite fate. A runaway greenhouse effect likely transformed it from a potentially habitable world into an inferno. Oceans would have boiled away. Atmospheric pressure would have risen. Surface life would not endure. In both cases, planetary scale change could unfold over millions of years. Not instant annihilation, but gradual degradation. Enough time for life to struggle, adapt, and possibly migrate, if migration were possible. This is where the idea of a lost world enters quietly. Lost does not mean destroyed overnight. It means changed beyond recognition. A place that once supported life becomes unable to do so. The life that depended on it either adapts elsewhere or vanishes. If humanity's deep ancestry included a phase that unfolded on a different world, Mars and Venus are the closest candidates by proximity and timing. Earth, Mars, and Venus formed around the same time. Their early histories overlap. Material has been exchanged between them through asteroid impacts. Meteorites from Mars have been found on Earth. Panspermia, the idea that life can travel between planets, is not fringe science. It is actively studied. Microbes can survive extreme conditions. Rocks ejected by impacts can reach other worlds. The solar system is not sealed. If microbial life can travel, the idea that more complex life might eventually do so under extraordinary circumstances is not inconceivable, though it remains unproven. The key point is not whether humans literally boarded spacecraft from Mars or Venus. That framing is too narrow and too modern. The question is whether humanity's lineage could include phases that unfolded elsewhere under conditions that no longer exist. Consider how memory works across deep time. Even on Earth, civilizations forget their origins. Knowledge is lost. Languages disappear. entire societies collapse without a trace. Stretch this process across planetary time scales, and loss becomes inevitable. If a population migrated from a dying world to a more stable one, survival would take precedence over record-keeping. Technology might regress, culture might simplify, knowledge might fragment. What remains would be what was necessary to stay alive. Over thousands of generations, origin would become myth. Myth would become metaphor. Metaphor would become intuition. The idea of humans descending from the sky would not be a record of spacecraft. It would be a compressed memory of arrival. Mars, in particular, occupies a strange position in human imagination. It feels familiar in a way that other planets do not. Its day length is similar to Earth's. Its axial tilt produces seasons. Its surface features resemble deserts, canyons, and dry rivereds we recognize. When humans see images of Mars, they often describe it as Earth-like, even though it is not. That reaction is emotional, not analytical. It feels like a place that could have been home. This feeling does not prove anything, but it is persistent. Venus evokes a different reaction. Its brightness is alluring, but its reality is hostile. It is a reminder that appearance can deceive, that a world can look inviting while being lethal. Ancient myths often associate Venus with beauty and danger intertwined. This symbolic accuracy is striking, though coincidence is always possible. The idea of a lost world is also present in human mythologies without explicit planetary reference. Stories of golden ages, fallen realms, drowned lands, and vanished civilizations appear across cultures. Atlantis is the most famous example, but it is far from unique. These stories often describe places that were advanced, harmonious, and prosperous, undone by catastrophe or moral failure. Survivors carry fragments of knowledge into a diminished world. Such stories are usually interpreted as allegories. They may encode real events like floods or volcanic eruptions, but they may also reflect a deeper psychological pattern. Humans seem preoccupied with loss, with the idea that something important existed before and was taken away. If humanity's deep past included a phase of existence that ended abruptly or gradually, that sense of loss could persist without specific memory. Modern science tends to resist these ideas because they are difficult to test. There is no direct evidence of past civilizations on Mars or Venus. No ruins, no artifacts, no signals. That absence matters. But absence must be weighed against time scale. Mars has been exposed to radiation for billions of years. Surface materials are constantly degraded. Venus's surface is geologically young due to widespread resurfacing. Any ancient evidence would likely be erased. Earth, by contrast, preserves history unusually well due to plate tectonics, sedimentation, and a protective atmosphere. The preservation biases our understanding toward Earth-based narratives. This bias does not invalidate science. It contextualizes it. The idea of a lost world also reframes Earth's role. Instead of being the birthplace of humanity, Earth becomes a refuge, a place that allowed life to continue when other options failed. That interpretation casts Earth not as ordinary, but as fortunate. It also reframes humanity's relationship with the planet. We would not be native heirs, but long-term residents who adapted and forgot. That forgetting would be complete by now. No living human would remember anything different. Identity would be fully earthbound. Only faint intuitions would remain, expressed through myth, symbolism, and persistent curiosity. Mars exploration often carries an emotional undertone that goes beyond science. There is a sense of return, of familiarity. Language reflects this. We talk about colonizing Mars, settling it, making it habitable again. We do not speak this way about Venus, or Jupiter, or Saturn. Mars feels like a second chance, rather than an alien place. Why? Some of that feeling comes from practicality. Mars is reachable. Its conditions, while harsh, are manageable. But practicality does not fully explain the emotional charge. Mars feels like a place that almost made it. Venus feels like a warning. Mars feels like a missed opportunity. If humanity were ever forced to leave Earth in the future, Mars would likely be the first destination considered. That symmetry is intriguing. We look to Mars both as a future refuge and, perhaps unconsciously, as a past echo. Again, none of this establishes fact. It establishes resonance. Science demands evidence. But imagination, when disciplined, can point science toward new questions. Asking whether humanity's lineage could include a lost world does not reject Earth-based evolution. It expands the timeline and context in which evolution is considered. At minimum, Mars and Venus teach us that worlds can change drastically, that habitability is temporary, and that life, if it exists, must adapt or move. Humanity now faces similar questions about Earth's future. Climate change, environmental degradation, and technological risk raise the possibility that Earth itself could become less hospitable. For the first time, humans consider migration beyond Earth not as myth, but as strategy. In that sense, the idea of a lost world is no longer abstract. It is cautionary. If humanity once lost a home without remembering it, that loss would shape us in ways we barely understand. It would make survival central. It would make adaptation instinctive. It would make looking to the sky feel natural. If humanity did not originate entirely on Earth, how could life or lineage move between worlds at all? When the idea of life traveling through space is first mentioned, it often sounds fantastical, as if it belongs more to science fiction than to serious discussion. Images of spores drifting between stars or organisms hitching rides on comets can feel whimsical, even implausible. And yet, beneath the surface, the concept known as panspermia occupies a quiet but legitimate place in scientific thought. It is not a claim that intelligent beings roam the cosmos, seeding planets deliberately. It is a much more restrained idea, one that asks a simple question. If life can survive extreme conditions, and if material moves naturally between worlds, is it possible that life's ancestry is not confined to a single planet? Panspermia, in its most basic form, proposes that life, or at least the building blocks of life, can be transported through space from one environment to another. This transport does not require intention, intelligence, or technology. It relies only on physics, chemistry, and time. Meteor impacts eject material from planetary surfaces. Some of that material escapes gravity. Some of it travels vast distances. Some of it lands elsewhere. Over billions of years, even extremely unlikely events become statistically possible. This idea did not arise from speculation alone. It emerged from observation. Meteorites found on Earth have been traced back to Mars. Their chemical signatures match Martian geology. We know with certainty that rocks can travel between planets. We also know that some microbes on Earth can survive conditions that were once assumed to be fatal: extreme cold, extreme heat, vacuum, radiation, dormancy lasting tens of thousands of years. Life, it turns out, is more durable than expected. Bacterial spores have been shown to survive exposure to space for limited periods. Tardigrades, microscopic organisms often called water bears, can endure vacuum, radiation, and dehydration. These are not hypothetical organisms. They exist here, now. Their resilience forces scientists to reconsider what environments are truly uninhabitable. If microbial life can survive ejection from a planet, transit through space, and impact on another world, then the spread of life within a solar system becomes plausible. Not guaranteed, not frequent, but plausible. And once plausibility enters the discussion, ancestry becomes more complicated. Under this view, life on Earth might not have originated here, at least not entirely. It could have been seeded by life that arose elsewhere. Perhaps on Mars during its wetter, warmer past, or perhaps on a body we no longer recognize as a viable origin point. Earth would then be less a birthplace and more a continuation. This does not diminish Earth's role. It magnifies it. Earth becomes the place where life flourished most successfully, where complexity reached extraordinary levels. But it would not be alone in life's story. It would be part of a broader system. There are different versions of panspermia. Lithopanspermia involves life traveling inside rocks. Radipanspermia involves microscopic particles propelled by radiation pressure. Directed panspermia, the most speculative, involves intentional seeding by advanced civilizations. It is important to separate these ideas clearly. The first two are actively discussed in astrobiology. The third remains hypothetical and controversial. For the question of humanity's deep ancestry, directed panspermia is not necessary. Intentional seeding is not required. Simple continuity is enough. If life on Earth shares ancestry with life elsewhere, then humanity, as part of Earth's biosphere, shares that ancestry too. This shifts the question subtly but profoundly. Instead of asking whether humans came from another planet in any direct sense, we ask whether the lineage that eventually produced humans might have begun somewhere else long before Earth existed in its current form. Under this framework, humanity's cosmic ancestry would not be unique. Every tree, bacterium, and animal on Earth would share it. Earth would be a node in a much larger biological network. But there is a more intriguing layer to consider. Panspermia does not only apply to the origin of life. In principle, it could apply to the movement of more complex biological material as well. Genetic material can survive in dormant states. Cells can remain inactive for immense spans of time. Evolution can pause and resume. If a population of organisms were transferred to a new environment, even unintentionally, they would adapt. Over time, they would diverge. Their descendants would look nothing like their ancestors. The original context would be erased. In such a scenario, no memory of origin would survive. Only compatibility would matter. If the new environment allowed survival, life would continue. If not, it would end. Now imagine this process not once, but repeatedly across cosmic timescales. Life emerges, life spreads, life adapts, lineages branch, and forget their beginnings. From within any single branch, origin appears local. From a broader view, it is distributed. If humanity is one such branch, then Earth is both home and waypoint. This perspective reframes many of the questions we have already considered. The fragility of the human body becomes less puzzling if our lineage adapted through multiple environments. Sudden leaps in intelligence could reflect long-term potentials, finally expressed under stable conditions. The obsession with the sky could be a residual orientation toward a larger context. Even ancient myths of descent take on a different flavor. They would not be memories of spacecraft, but symbolic echoes of continuity beyond Earth. Humanity arriving from the sky would mean humanity emerging from a lineage not confined to one world. There is also the matter of chemistry. The basic molecules of life, amino acids, nucleotides, and organic compounds, are found throughout space. They have been detected in interstellar clouds, comets, and meteorites. The chemistry of life is not unique to Earth. It is cosmic. This means that the raw materials for life are widely distributed. Earth did not need to invent them. It assembled them. When scientists simulate early Earth conditions, they can produce organic molecules, but those same molecules are already present elsewhere. Life's toolkit appears universal. If the tools are universal, then the emergence of life may not be a singular event. It may be a process that unfolds wherever conditions allow, influenced by what arrives, as much as by what forms locally. This makes the idea of cosmic ancestry less exotic. It becomes a question of scale rather than category. Human DNA does not contain obvious markers of extraterrestrial origin. It aligns closely with other Earth life. But under panspermia, shared ancestry would be expected. Life arriving from elsewhere would blend into Earth's biosphere, not stand apart from it. There would be no alien signature. There would be continuity. This is one reason panspermia is difficult to test. If it happened early enough, its traces would be indistinguishable from local origin. The only difference would be philosophical, not biological. Some scientists have suggested that life on Earth appeared remarkably early, almost as soon as conditions allowed. This rapid emergence raises questions. Did life arise quickly because Earth was uniquely fertile, or because it was seeded? There is no definitive answer. Both possibilities remain open. What becomes especially interesting in the context of humanity is the timeline. Intelligent life requires stability, billions of years of relative calm. Earth provided that. Mars and Venus did not. If life began elsewhere and arrived here early, Earth would be the place where it finally had time to grow complex. Under this view, humanity would not be an accident of Earth alone. It would be the result of a long filtering process. Many worlds try, few succeed. Earth succeeded. That success does not require intention. It requires persistence. Cosmic ancestry also reframes human uniqueness. Humans are not special because they are separate from the universe. They are special because they're deeply continuous with it. Every atom in the human body was forged in stars. Every molecule carries a history that predates Earth itself. This is not poetic metaphor. It is literal chemistry. When humans look up at the sky and feel a sense of connection, that feeling is grounded in reality. We are made of cosmic material. Our existence is a rearrangement of ancient matter. Panspermia extends that connection from matter to life. If life is cosmic, then humanity is not an isolated phenomenon. It is an expression of a broader tendency of the universe to organize complexity under the right conditions. This does not make humanity insignificant. It places humanity within a larger story, one that does not begin or end on Earth. Of course, skepticism is essential. Panspermia remains unproven. It explains some puzzles while leaving others untouched. It shifts questions rather than resolving them. But science progresses by entertaining such shifts cautiously. by asking whether alternative frameworks produce coherence without contradiction. At minimum, panspermia reminds us that Earth is not sealed. It is part of a dynamic system. Material flows, energy flows, possibility flows. Humanity, as a product of that system, may carry a history that is wider than we assume, even if we will never be able to reconstruct it fully. When scientists turn to genetics in search of human origins, they're often looking for clarity. DNA feels definitive in a way stories, fossils, and artifacts do not. It is measurable, comparable, and quantifiable. It records descent with remarkable precision. And yet, the deeper genetic research goes, the more it reveals not just clean lines of ancestry, but complexity, irregularity, and questions that do not always resolve neatly. Genetics tells a story, but it is not a simple one. And within that story, there are small curiosities that invite careful attention rather than dramatic conclusions. At first glance, the human genome appears thoroughly terrestrial. Humans share a large percentage of their DNA with other Earth life. We are closely related to primates, more distantly related to mammals, and still more distantly connected to all living organisms on the planet. This continuity is real and undeniable. Any discussion of cosmic ancestry must begin by acknowledging that humans are deeply embedded in Earth's biosphere at the genetic level. But embedded does not necessarily mean originating exclusively here. Genetics is a record of survival, not a record of beginnings. It tells us which lineages persisted, which mixed, which adapted, and which vanished. It does not always tell us where a lineage first arose, especially if that origin lies beyond the resolution of available data. Over long time scales, genetic signals blur. Bottlenecks, mutations, horizontal gene transfer, and selection pressures reshape genomes in ways that erase earlier context. One of the first quiet curiosities geneticists encountered was how recent much of human genetic diversity is. Modern humans share a striking degree of similarity. Compared to many other species, we are genetically homogeneous. This suggests that our population passed through one or more severe bottlenecks, periods when numbers dropped dramatically and diversity was lost. Such bottlenecks are not unusual in evolution, but their implications are significant. A bottleneck effectively resets genetic history. Whatever existed before becomes inaccessible. From that point forward, all lineages trace back to a small surviving group. If humanity experienced a deep bottleneck, perhaps due to climate catastrophe, disease, or environmental upheaval, then our genetic story would appear to begin there, even if the lineage itself is much older. This possibility becomes more intriguing when we consider how many bottlenecks may have occurred. Evidence suggests multiple population contractions throughout human history. Each one narrows the window through which we can see the past. Another curiosity lies in how rapidly certain genetic changes spread. Traits related to brain development, speech, and cognition appear to have undergone relatively fast selection. This is not impossible within Earth-based evolution, but it raises questions about underlying readiness. Selection acts on variation that already exists. It does not invent from nothing. If a population already carried latent capacities, selection could amplify them quickly once conditions favored their expression. This would produce the appearance of sudden innovation without requiring sudden mutation. Geneticists also study regulatory genes, genes that control when and how other genes are expressed. Small changes in these regulatory systems can have large effects on development and behavior. Humans differ from other primates, not only in which genes they have, but in how those genes are used. This means that major behavioral shifts do not necessarily require large genetic changes. They can arise from reorganization. The genome becomes less a blueprint and more a set of instructions that can be rearranged. Such flexibility makes the genome an excellent adapter, but a poor historian. It preserves function better than context. There are also instances of genetic material in humans that do not fit neatly into known evolutionary pathways. Some genes appear unusually conserved, meaning they have changed very little over long periods of time. Others show signs of rapid divergence. Still others appear to have unclear origins. One example often discussed is endogenous retroviruses. These are viral sequences embedded in our DNA, remnants of ancient infections that became part of the genome. They make up a significant portion of human DNA. Most are inactive, but some have been repurposed for essential functions, including roles in placental development. These viral elements remind us that genomes are patchworks. They incorporate material from unexpected sources. They're not pristine records of linear descent. They're accumulations. This raises a subtle point. If genetic material from viruses can integrate into genomes and become functional, then genetic history is not strictly vertical. It can be horizontal. It can incorporate material that did not originate within the lineage itself. This does not imply extraterrestrial genes in humans. There is no evidence for that. But it does undermine the idea that genomes are closed systems. They're open to influence. Another area of curiosity involves so-called junk DNA, now more accurately referred to as non-coding DNA. For a long time, large portions of the genome were thought to be useless. That view has changed. Many non-coding regions play regulatory roles. Some influence development, timing, and structure. Yet, even with improved understanding, much of non-coding DNA remains poorly understood. It does not map cleanly onto known functions. Some sequences are highly conserved without obvious purpose. Others vary widely. This uncertainty does not mean mystery in a sensational sense. It means incompleteness. Genetics is still an evolving field, but incompleteness leaves room for unexpected histories. There is also the phenomenon of introgression. Modern humans interbred with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly other hominins. These interactions left genetic traces that affect immunity, metabolism, and adaptation to environment. This shows that humanity is not the product of a single, isolated lineage. It is a composite. Multiple human-like populations contributed to what we now call Homo sapiens. If such mixing occurred on Earth, it is reasonable to consider that mixing could also have occurred earlier in contexts we no longer recognize. Genetic blending erases clear boundaries. Over time, distinct origins converge. Another curiosity lies in how humans adapt genetically to new environments. High-altitude populations develop different oxygen processing traits. Arctic populations show metabolic adaptations to cold and diet. These changes can occur relatively quickly. This demonstrates how responsive the human genome is to environmental pressure. If humanity arrived in a new environment under stress, adaptation would follow swiftly. After enough generations, the genome would reflect the new environment, not the old one. Any genetic signature of prior environments would fade. This is especially true if adaptation relied more on regulation than on structural gene change. The genome would reorganize itself around new conditions while retaining core capacities. There is also the question of mutation rates. Human mutation rates are relatively stable, but they are influenced by radiation exposure, environmental toxins, and metabolic stress. A shift in environment could alter mutation dynamics subtly over time. If a lineage moved from a more protected environment to one with higher radiation exposure, mutation rates might increase slightly. Over long periods, this could accelerate divergence and adaptation. Such effects would not leave a clear marker saying this came from elsewhere. They would simply alter the pace of change. Another area of interest is mitochondrial DNA. Passed down through maternal lines, it provides a relatively clean lineage marker. Studies of mitochondrial DNA point to a common maternal ancestor for modern humans, often referred to as mitochondrial Eve. This does not mean there was only one woman. It means that other maternal lines eventually ended. Again, a bottleneck. Mitochondrial DNA traces lineage within Earth populations, but it cannot see beyond the point where those lineages converge. It tells us about survival, not about absolute origin. The same is true for Y chromosome studies tracing paternal lines. Genetics excels at reconstructing relationships within a given framework. It is less capable of revealing what lies beyond that framework. One of the most important things genetics has taught us is humility. Early expectations of finding simple answers were quickly replaced by recognition of complexity. The genome is not a tidy book. It is a palimpsest, written over again and again. Every generation edits the text. Selection erases some lines. Mutation adds others. Recombination shuffles paragraphs. Over time, earlier drafts become unreadable. If humanity's deep past included chapters written under different conditions, those chapters may be completely overwritten. This does not mean they existed. It means genetics cannot easily rule them out. It is also worth noting that genetic research is constrained by sampling. We study living humans and a small number of ancient remains. We do not have access to genomes that did not survive. Our picture is shaped by survivors. Survivorship bias affects all historical sciences. Genetics is no exception. Another quiet curiosity is how well humans adapt psychologically to the idea of not being alone in the universe. Surveys show that many people find the idea of extraterrestrial life unsurprising or even expected. This attitude is relatively recent, but it suggests a cognitive openness to broader context. That openness does not come from genetics directly, but genetics shapes cognition. Curiosity, pattern recognition, and abstraction are deeply rooted traits. One could argue that humans are predisposed to think cosmically because our environment encouraged it. Or one could wonder whether that predisposition reflects a deeper lineage of interaction with broader contexts. Again, no proof lies here, only coherence. Genetics, when examined carefully, does not shout secrets. It whispers constraints. It tells us what must be true, not everything that could be true. What must be true is that humans are part of Earth's biosphere. Now, what could be true is that Earth is not the very first environment in which our lineage took shape. Between those two statements lies a vast space of possibility, bounded by evidence and imagination. The quiet scientific curiosities in genetics do not demand radical conclusions. They invite patience. They remind us that absence of contradiction is not confirmation, but it is permission to keep asking. When we think about the word refuge, it carries a very different weight than the word birthplace. A birthplace suggests origin, inevitability, and natural belonging. A refuge suggests necessity, survival, and adaptation under pressure. One is passive, the other is chosen, even if the choice is forced. Asking whether Earth could have been a refuge, rather than a birthplace, does not deny that humanity belongs here now. It asks whether belonging might have been earned rather than inherited. This distinction matters because it reframes how we interpret humanity's long relationship with the planet. If Earth were our birthplace, we would expect a deep, effortless fit, not perfection, but a sense that the environment and the organism grew together. If Earth were a refuge, we would expect signs of adjustment, negotiation, and gradual accommodation. We would expect evidence not of immediate harmony, but of learning how to live here. When we look at human history through this lens, certain patterns begin to stand out. Human survival on Earth has always depended on preparation. We do not simply exist in most environments, we plan for them. We anticipate winter, we store food, we build shelter against rain, heat, cold, wind, insects, and predators. Even in regions that are relatively mild, human cultures develop layers of protection almost immediately. Clothing appears early. Fire appears early. Tools appear early. This is often explained as intelligence expressing itself naturally. And that explanation is valid. But intelligence itself does not require such constant buffering in every species. Many intelligent animals still live largely exposed to their environments. Humans do not. Consider how quickly humans transform landscapes. Forests are cleared. Rivers are redirected. Animals are domesticated. Crops are selectively bred. These behaviors emerge almost as soon as humans settle in a place. The impulse is not merely to live within the environment, but to make it more predictable, more controllable, more survivable. That impulse aligns closely with how refugees behave. Refugees, by necessity, recreate familiar conditions in unfamiliar places. They bring practices, tools, and knowledge that help them survive environments that were not originally theirs. They adapt quickly, but they do not forget the need for adaptation. Vigilance becomes part of daily life. Human cultures show this vigilance everywhere. Rituals for weather, calendars for seasons, architecture designed to resist environmental threats, medicine developed to counter local diseases, diets adjusted carefully to available resources. If Earth were humanity's original home, one might expect more instinctive compatibility. Instead, much of human success comes from anticipation rather than instinct. There is also the question of distribution. Humans occupy nearly every environment on Earth, but rarely without significant modification. Deserts require irrigation. Cold regions require insulation. Tropics require disease management. High altitudes require adaptation. Humans do not simply arrive and thrive. They arrive, struggle, and engineer solutions. This pattern resembles colonization more than emergence. Colonization does not imply conquest in a moral sense. It describes the process of establishing life in a place that does not immediately support it. Colonists bring systems. They rely on knowledge rather than instinct. They modify rather than merge. That description fits humanity uncomfortably well. Another aspect of refuge is memory loss. Refuge populations often lose detailed memory of where they came from within a few generations. Stories simplify. Trauma compresses history. Practical survival takes precedence over preservation of origin narratives. Over time, the new place becomes home, and the old place becomes legend. If humanity arrived on Earth under dire circumstances, perhaps following environmental collapse elsewhere, memory would not be a priority. Survival would. Technological regression would also be likely. Infrastructure would be difficult to maintain. Knowledge dependent on stable systems would disappear first. What would remain would be what could be carried in bodies and minds: language, social structure, basic tool use, stories. Those stories would evolve over thousands of years. They would become myths of descent, floods, sky beings, lost ages, and forgotten homes. This is not speculative psychology. It is observed human behavior. Displacement reshapes narrative. Earth itself has experienced repeated waves of migration and refuge. During ice ages, humans retreated to refugia, pockets of habitable land where survival was possible. When conditions improved, they expanded again. Genetic evidence reflects these cycles. Scale that pattern up, and Earth itself could be seen as a refugium, not from regional climate change, but from planetary instability elsewhere. There is also the timing to consider. Earth's long-term stability is unusual. Plate tectonics regulate climate. A large moon stabilizes axial tilt. A magnetic field shields radiation. Gas giants like Jupiter deflect many incoming objects. These factors create a relatively safe environment over geological time. Earth is not just habitable, it is resilient. If life was seeking a long-term refuge, Earth would be an excellent candidate. This does not require intent. It requires selection. Life that arrives here has a better chance of persistence. Over time, Earth accumulates complexity, while less stable worlds lose it. In that sense, Earth would function as a filter. Not all life survives long enough to become intelligent. Earth allows time. The refugee idea also reframes humanity's relationship with risk. Humans are acutely aware of environmental threats. Flood myths appear everywhere. Fire myths appear everywhere. Stories of skyfalls, winters, and catastrophes appear everywhere. Humans behave as if the world is fragile, even when conditions are stable. That persistent caution could reflect inherited experience. A lineage that survived planetary instability would not easily forget that worlds can fail. Modern humans show this behavior vividly. Even with advanced technology, we remain anxious about environmental collapse, asteroid impacts, solar storms, and climate change. These fears are not irrational. They reflect real vulnerabilities. But the intensity with which they grip human imagination is notable. We worry about Earth failing us. A species that evolved entirely within a stable environment might take that stability for granted. Humans do not. The refugee perspective also aligns with humanity's tendency to create backups. We store seeds in vaults. We archive knowledge. We send probes into space, carrying records of our existence. We plan for redundancy. We think in terms of continuity beyond immediate conditions. This is not just intelligence, it is precaution. Precaution is learned. Another telling detail is how humans relate to wildness. Many species are deeply integrated into ecosystems. Humans often experience wildness as something separate, something to be managed or preserved intentionally. We create parks and reserves to protect what feels external to us. This separation is cultural, but it may also be psychological. Humans see themselves as distinct from nature rather than as one expression of it. That sense of separateness could arise from intelligence alone, but it could also arise from displacement, from arriving into a system rather than emerging from it. None of this implies hostility toward Earth. On the contrary, humans show deep affection for the planet. We describe it as mother, home, sanctuary. Those are the words one uses for a refuge that has become beloved. Refuge does not mean temporary, as many refugees become permanent homes. The idea that Earth might be a refuge also helps explain why humans feel both attachment and restlessness. We love this planet, yet we constantly look beyond it. We build telescopes. We imagine leaving. We plan for life elsewhere. We do not behave like a species content to remain forever. That restlessness is often framed as curiosity or ambition. It may be, but it could also reflect a deeper pattern. A lineage shaped by movement does not settle easily. If humanity's deep past involved migration between environments, then movement itself would be part of identity. Earth would be one stop in a longer journey, even if it became the longest and most meaningful one. The refuge idea also reframes technological development. Technology becomes not a luxury, but a survival trait. Humans do not merely invent for convenience. They invent to survive conditions their bodies alone cannot handle. This urgency is visible even in early technology. Fire is not just warmth, it is protection. Tools are not just efficiency, they're compensation. A species born into an environment it fits well might innovate more slowly. A species adapting into an environment under pressure innovates quickly. Human innovation has always been driven by necessity. There is also a subtle symmetry in how humans view Earth's past and future. We speak of preserving Earth for future generations as if it can be lost. We speak of saving the planet, even though the planet itself will persist in some form, regardless of human activity. What we're really trying to save is habitability. This focus on habitability suggests that humans intuitively understand that worlds can become unlivable. That understanding may come from observation of Earth's own changes, but it could also be inherited as a deep assumption about how reality works. If Earth were humanity's birthplace, the idea of it becoming uninhabitable might feel abstract. If Earth were humanity's refuge, the fear of losing it would be visceral. Modern space exploration reinforces this. When humans imagine settling other planets, the language is not of birth, but of refuge. We speak of backup planets, second homes, insurance policies for civilization. That language is revealing. It mirrors the behavior of a species that has learned, consciously or not, that survival may depend on having somewhere else to go. Still, it is important to remain grounded. The refuge idea is not a claim. It is an interpretive frame. It does not override genetics, fossils, or established science. It asks whether the patterns we see align more naturally with emergence or with adaptation. So far, the patterns do not contradict the idea of refuge. They also do not prove it. What they do is keep the question open. Earth could be humanity's birthplace. It could also be humanity's sanctuary. The two are not mutually exclusive. If origin is distributed across time and space, what matters is not which answer is correct, but how the question changes our perspective. Seeing Earth as a refuge emphasizes responsibility. It highlights fragility. It deepens appreciation. If Earth took humanity in and allowed it to flourish when other environments could not, then our relationship with this planet is not entitlement. It is gratitude. If humanity were in some deep sense immigrants of the cosmos, what would that mean for identity, ethics, and the way we understand ourselves? To imagine humanity as immigrants of the cosmos is not to imagine spaceships, uniforms, or deliberate voyages. plotted on star maps. It is a quieter idea than that, and in some ways, more unsettling. It asks what it would do to human identity if belonging were not rooted in a single place, but in movement, survival, and adaptation across contexts larger than any one world. It is not a question about technology or timelines. It is a question about self-understanding. Human identity has always been shaped by origin stories. Nations define themselves by founding events. Families trace lineage. Individuals ask where they come from in order to understand who they are. The idea that humanity itself might be an immigrant lineage stretches this instinct to its limit. It removes the comfort of a fixed beginning and replaces it with continuity across change. Immigrants are shaped not only by where they arrive, but by what they leave behind. Even when memory fades, patterns remain. Ways of coping, habits of caution, impulses toward preservation, and sensitivity to loss persist long after the original displacement is forgotten. These traits become cultural, psychological, and eventually invisible, simply part of how people are. If humanity were in some deep and ancient sense an immigrant lineage, Earth would not be a stage we emerged onto naturally, but a place we learn to survive within. That framing alters how familiar behaviors appear. Consider how central adaptability is to the human story. Humans rarely dominate environments by brute force. We dominate by flexibility. We change diets, social structures, technologies, and belief systems rapidly. When conditions demand it, we abandon old ways when they stop working. We reinvent constantly. This is not the behavior of a species that expects permanence. It is the behavior of a species that assumes change. Immigrant cultures on Earth often show similar traits. They preserve what is essential, discard what is impractical, and hybridize quickly with their new surroundings. Identity becomes layered rather than singular. Old and new coexist. Human culture as a whole looks like this on a planetary scale. Traditions accumulate, beliefs merge, languages borrow endlessly. There is no single, unbroken cultural line. Everything is mixed. Even biology reflects this. Human genomes are mosaics. Neanderthal DNA, Denisovan DNA, and possibly other unknown hominin contributions are woven into modern populations. Humanity is literally composite. If we apply that same logic beyond Earth, the idea of cosmic immigration becomes less radical. It simply extends an existing pattern outward. Another implication lies in how humans relate to home. Home for humans is rarely just a place. It is something constructed. We build houses, we define borders, we create rituals that anchor us emotionally to locations. Home is made, not assumed. Animals often have territories. Humans create homes. This difference matters. A species that evolved entirely within a stable niche might rely more on instinctual belonging. Humans rely on symbolic belonging. Flags, myths, architecture, and memory do the work that instinct does for other species. That reliance could emerge from intelligence alone, but it could also emerge from displacement. When instinctive belonging is disrupted, symbolic systems fill the gap. There is also the persistent human concern with legitimacy. Humans argue endlessly about who belongs where. Borders, citizenship, heritage, and ancestry occupy enormous social energy. These concerns are not universal across species. They are specific to humans. One could argue that this obsession arises from social complexity. That is true. But it may also arise from a deeper insecurity. A species unsure of its ultimate belonging might seek to define belonging at every smaller scale. If humanity were immigrants of the cosmos, the question of belonging would never fully resolve. Earth would be home, but not origin. That tension would echo through culture endlessly. This perspective also reshapes how humans view difference. Immigrant lineages often develop a heightened awareness of diversity. They notice variation. They adapt to difference. Humanity shows an unusual capacity for this. We form alliances across language, appearance, and belief. We also struggle with it, oscillating between cooperation and conflict. This oscillation could reflect a lineage shaped by repeated encounters with unfamiliar conditions. Flexibility becomes necessary, but fear of the unfamiliar never disappears entirely. Another implication concerns memory. If humanity's deepest origin lies beyond Earth, then memory of that origin would almost certainly be gone. Not suppressed, not hidden, simply erased by time, adaptation, and survival pressure. What remains when memory disappears are tendencies rather than facts, preferences rather than narratives, and orientation rather than a story. The orientation in this case would be outward. Humans consistently imagine futures that extend beyond Earth. Even when survival on this planet is uncertain, we talk about space habitats, other worlds, and long-term continuity beyond a single environment. This is not a universal trait among intelligent animals. It is specific to humans. That future-oriented migration instinct could arise from curiosity. It could arise from ambition. It could also arise from inherited disposition. A lineage that survived by moving would retain movement as a solution, even when immediate necessity is absent. If humanity were immigrants of the cosmos, Earth would represent stability rather than origin. That would explain why humans feel both gratitude toward the planet and a persistent readiness to leave it if required. This readiness does not mean lack of care. In fact, it often coexists with deep attachment. Immigrants can love their new homes fiercely, even while knowing they are not the first place their story began. Another subtle implication lies in how humans think about extinction. Humans are unusually preoccupied with their own end. We imagine apocalypse in countless forms: asteroids, nuclear war, pandemics, climate collapse. This fixation is ancient and persistent. Many species face extinction without conceptualizing it. Humans conceptualize it constantly. This could reflect intelligence alone, but it could also reflect inherited awareness that extinction is not theoretical, that worlds fail, that environments change, that survival is conditional. A species shaped by cosmic displacement would carry that awareness quietly woven into its psychology. There is also the way humans treat knowledge. We record obsessively. We write, carve, encode, archive, and transmit information across generations. We build libraries and data vaults. We send records into space. We worry about losing knowledge almost as much as we worry about losing lives. This behavior aligns strongly with displacement. When continuity is threatened, preservation becomes urgent. Knowledge becomes survival. Immigrant communities often place extraordinary value on education, memory, and record-keeping. Humanity does this collectively. Even science itself reflects this tendency. We do not simply observe the universe. We attempt to reconstruct its past, predict its future, and place ourselves within it. We seek context beyond immediate survival. If humanity were immigrants of the cosmos, then science would be more than curiosity. It would be a form of orientation, a way of understanding where we are within a larger system that we dimly sense but cannot remember directly. This framing also changes how we interpret human creativity. Art, music, and storytelling often revolve around themes of loss, longing, journey, exile, and return. These themes appear everywhere, across cultures and eras. Artists repeatedly imagine distant homes, vanished ages, and unreachable places. These motifs do not require cosmic origin to exist. They could arise from ordinary human experience, but their universality suggests something deeper. Longing without a clear object often points to forgotten context. If Earth were humanity's birthplace, longing might focus more on return to nature, to simplicity, to an imagined past within Earth's history. That longing exists, but alongside it exists a different longing directed outward, toward stars, futures, and places never visited. This outward longing is not satisfied by nostalgia. It looks forward rather than backward. Another implication concerns ethics. If humanity sees itself as part of a broader cosmic process rather than the product of a single planet, responsibility shifts. Earth becomes not a possession, but a trust, a refuge that must be maintained because refugees are finite. That ethical shift is subtle but powerful. It discourages entitlement. It encourages stewardship. It frames environmental care not as preservation of birthright, but as protection of sanctuary. This perspective also alters how humans might relate to potential extraterrestrial life. If humanity is not unique in its origin, encountering other life would feel less like invasion and more like reunion within a shared process, not familiar in a literal sense, but familiar in structure. Fear would not disappear, but context would expand. The immigrant framing also dissolves certain hierarchies. If humanity is one expression of a broader cosmic lineage, then intelligence is not a pinnacle, but a phase. Responsibility increases rather than dominance. This does not diminish human meaning. It reframes it. Meaning becomes relational rather than absolute. There is also an emotional consequence. Seeing oneself as an immigrant lineage can be unsettling. It removes the comfort of rootedness. It suggests contingency. It implies that existence depends on conditions that can change. But humans already live with this discomfort. We build systems to manage it. Religions, philosophies, and sciences all attempt to stabilize identity in the face of uncertainty. The idea of cosmic immigration does not introduce instability. It names it. Importantly, this framing does not require certainty. One does not need proof of cosmic origin to consider its implications. The value lies in how it reshapes perspective as a thought experiment. It encourages humility. It encourages patience. It encourages long-term thinking. If humanity were immigrants of the cosmos, then Earth is not merely a resource. It is a host, and hosts can be exhausted. This perspective aligns with current scientific understanding of planetary fragility. Habitability is rare. Stability is temporary. Life depends on balance. Whether or not humanity arrived here from elsewhere, we now face the same conditions that would have driven any past migration. Environmental stress, technological risk, limited margins for error. The difference is that this time, humanity is aware of the stakes. That awareness may be the most important inheritance of all. Not memory of a lost world, but sensitivity to the fact that worlds can be lost. At some point in every long inquiry, attention shifts away from evidence and toward consequence. Not because evidence stops mattering, but because the act of asking begins to shape perception in ways that answers rarely do. The question of whether Earth is humanity's original home sits precisely in that space. It is compelling not because it demands resolution, but because of what happens to human thinking when the possibility is allowed to exist without being rushed towards certainty. Questions have gravity. They pull other thoughts into their orbit. Once asked seriously, they rearrange priorities, soften assumptions, and expose habits of belief that previously went unnoticed. This particular question does that quietly. It does not shout. It does not insist. It simply lingers. And in lingering, it changes how familiar things are seen. Most people assume that answers are the goal of inquiry. In science, answers are provisional. In philosophy, they're often contextual. In lived experience, answers frequently close doors rather than open them. Questions, by contrast, keep doors ajar. They allow multiple interpretations to coexist without collapsing into conflict. Asking whether Earth is humanity's birthplace or refuge forces a re-examination of what it means to belong. Belonging is usually treated as a binary condition. You either belong somewhere or you do not. You are native or foreign. Origin becomes destiny. But reality is rarely that simple. Humans belong to Earth now. That fact is not in question. Our bodies depend on its chemistry. Our cultures depend on its ecosystems. Our futures depend on its stability. But belonging now does not automatically define belonging then. The assumption that it does is emotional rather than logical. This distinction matters because it affects how humans relate to responsibility. If Earth is seen as a guaranteed inheritance, something we emerge from naturally and therefore own implicitly, responsibility can feel optional. Care becomes a choice rather than a necessity. Damage becomes abstract. If Earth is seen as a refuge, care becomes essential. Damage becomes personal. The loss of habitability is no longer theoretical. It is existential. This shift does not require belief in cosmic origin. It requires only the willingness to entertain uncertainty about absolute beginnings. Uncertainty has ethical consequences. Human history shows that certainty often breeds complacency. Civilizations that believe themselves permanent behave differently from those that understand fragility. Awareness of fragility encourages preservation, foresight, and restraint. It discourages waste and short-term thinking. The question of origin then functions as a tool. It destabilizes complacency without replacing it with fear. Another reason the question matters lies in how humans understand progress. Modern narratives often frame history as a steady ascent. We came from simplicity. We moved toward complexity. We advanced. This narrative is comforting. It suggests inevitability. It implies that the future will naturally improve if the past did. But the evidence does not fully support this story. History is uneven. Progress stalls. Knowledge is lost. Entire societies regress technologically and culturally under the right conditions. Advancement requires maintenance. If humanity's story includes displacement, collapse, or forgotten chapters, then progress is not guaranteed. It is contingent. It depends on environment, cooperation, and care. That realization changes how the present is valued. It makes preservation as important as innovation. The question also matters because it reframes human uniqueness. Humans often struggle with the idea of not being central. Scientific discoveries that decenter humanity, such as heliocentrism or evolution, have historically provoked resistance. The idea that humanity might not have originated on Earth touches a similar nerve. Yet decentering does not diminish meaning, it redistributes it. Meaning becomes relational rather than hierarchical. If humanity is part of a broader cosmic process rather than a singular miracle isolated to one planet, then intelligence is not an accident. It is a pattern. That pattern carries responsibility. It implies that consciousness is rare, fragile, and valuable wherever it appears. This view encourages solidarity rather than dominance. Another consequence of the question lies in how humans think about time. Earth-based origin stories often focus on relatively short timescales. Hundreds of thousands of years feel vast from a human perspective. Cosmic timescales dwarf them. If humanity's lineage extends beyond Earth in any sense, even indirectly through earlier biological phases, then human time becomes nested within much longer processes. This nesting encourages patience. It discourages the illusion that current conditions are permanent. Patience is not passivity, it is perspective. The question also influences how humans imagine the future. If Earth is humanity's only and original home, leaving it might feel unnatural or unnecessary. If Earth is one home within a larger context, movement becomes a continuation rather than a rupture. This does not mean abandoning Earth. It means understanding that survival may one day require flexibility similar to what shaped our past, whether the past unfolded entirely here or not. Importantly, the question matters even if the answer is firmly Earth-based. Even if humanity originated entirely on this planet, asking the question still yields insight. It exposes assumptions. It clarifies values. It highlights fragility. In that sense, the question functions like a thought experiment in physics. Its value lies not in literal truth, but in what it reveals when applied. There is also a psychological dimension. Humans often carry a sense of displacement that is difficult to articulate. Feelings of not quite fitting, of longing for something undefined, of restlessness, even in comfort. These feelings are usually explained socially or individually. They may also have collective dimensions. The idea that humanity might be an immigrant lineage gives language to that feeling without insisting it be literal. It offers a metaphor grounded in survival rather than fantasy. Metaphors shape behavior. Seeing oneself as a guest rather than an owner changes how one treats a place. Another reason the question matters is how it affects scientific humility. Science advances by questioning assumptions, but it also operates within frameworks. Recognizing that even foundational assumptions like origin can be examined keeps inquiry flexible. This does not mean abandoning rigor. It means distinguishing between evidence and inference, between what is known and what is assumed, because it feels natural. The question also matters because it connects disparate fields. Biology, astronomy, anthropology, mythology, psychology, and ethics intersect here. Rarely does a single inquiry touch so many domains without demanding allegiance to one interpretation. That interdisciplinarity is valuable. It encourages integration rather than fragmentation of knowledge. Human understanding often advances when boundaries blur. There is also an existential aspect. Humans ask where they come from, not only to locate themselves in space, but to find meaning. Origin stories answer the question of why we're here. If origin is complex or distributed, meaning must be constructed rather than inherited. Constructed meaning is more fragile, but also more flexible. It allows humans to adapt values to changing conditions rather than clinging to fixed narratives. This adaptability may be essential in an era where environmental and technological change accelerate faster than cultural norms can stabilize. The question of cosmic origin also matters because it reframes loss. If worlds can be lost, then loss is not failure. It is part of a larger process. That perspective does not excuse destruction, but it contextualizes it. It encourages learning rather than denial. Humans struggle deeply with loss, species extinction, ecosystem collapse, cultural erasure. These losses feel unbearable, partly because they challenge the assumption of permanence. Recognizing impermanence as fundamental can soften denial and motivate protection. There is also a collective maturity embedded in this question. Mature systems accept uncertainty. Immature systems demand certainty, even when it is unwarranted. Human civilization is in a transitional phase, technologically powerful, environmentally vulnerable, globally interconnected. Questions that cultivate maturity are valuable. The question of Earth as refuge rather than birthplace does exactly that. It resists simple answers. It resists slogans. It invites sustained reflection. Another subtle consequence lies in how humans relate to each other. If humanity shares deeper, possibly shared displacement, then divisions based on superficial differences become less meaningful. All humans become co-survivors rather than competitors for rightful ownership. This does not eliminate conflict, but it reframes it as internal rather than fundamental. Even without cosmic origin, this reframing is beneficial. The question also affects how humans think about legacy. If humanity's story is longer and broader than Earth alone, then legacy is not just what we leave behind on this planet, but how we contribute to continuity beyond it. This encourages long-term thinking beyond individual lifespans, nations, or even planetary cycles. Perhaps, most importantly, the question matters because it resists closure. Humans often rush toward answers to relieve discomfort. But some discomfort is productive. It keeps awareness active. Closure can be comforting, but it can also become a barrier to learning. By allowing the question to remain open, humans practice intellectual patience. They learn to live with uncertainty without turning it into fear or fantasy. This practice is essential, not just for science, but for navigating complex futures. The question does not ask humans to believe they came from the stars. It asks them to consider what it means to belong responsibly to a world that can be lost. Whether Earth is humanity's birthplace, refuge, or both, the responsibility is the same. Care for the conditions that allow life to continue. Preserve what makes continuity possible. In that sense, the answer truly matters less than the posture the question encourages. A posture of humility, of gratitude, of awareness. Some questions do not ask to be solved. They ask to be kept. They settle into the mind, not as problems, but as companions, shaping the way other thoughts move around them. The question of where humanity truly comes from is one of these. After moving through bodies and bones, myths and molecules, planets and possibilities, it reaches a place where effort can finally soften, where curiosity no longer needs to push forward, and where it becomes possible to simply rest with uncertainty without trying to transform it into certainty. Resting with a mystery does not mean giving up on understanding. It means recognizing that understanding has different layers, and that not all of them arrive through answers. Some arrive through orientation, some through humility, some through a quiet shift in how familiar things are perceived. Human beings often treat origins as anchors. Knowing where something begins feels stabilizing. It gives shape to identity. It offers a sense of inevitability, but anchors can also limit movement. They hold things in place. When the anchor is lifted, there can be disorientation at first, followed by a different kind of balance, one that depends on awareness rather than certainty. The idea that Earth may not be the original home of humanity, whether taken literally, metaphorically, or simply as a thought experiment, loosens the anchor just enough to allow perspective to widen. It does not remove Earth from the center of human life. It changes how that center is experienced. Earth becomes not just the place we come from, but the place we are entrusted to. There is something deeply human about reaching the end of a long line of questioning and not demanding a conclusion. Children do this naturally. They ask questions not to close them, but to open space. Adults often forget this, trained by systems that reward answers over reflection. Returning to that childlike posture is not regression, it is maturity. When humans look up at the night sky, there is often a moment of stillness. The vastness interrupts internal noise. Personal concerns shrink. Time feels different. This response does not require belief in cosmic origin. It arises from scale, from recognizing that individual lives unfold within systems far larger than themselves. That recognition is calming not because it diminishes human importance, but because it relieves the pressure of centrality. One does not need to be the beginning of everything to matter. One needs only to participate meaningfully in what exists now. If humanity's deepest origins lie entirely on Earth, then the journey through this question still leads somewhere worthwhile. It leads to appreciation. Earth is not just the backdrop of human history. It is the condition that allowed it to unfold. Life here survived mass extinctions, climate shifts, and cosmic hazards. The continuity that produced humans is extraordinary regardless of where it began. If humanity's lineage includes earlier phases that unfolded elsewhere, then Earth's role becomes even more significant. It becomes the place where continuity was preserved, where complexity stabilized, where intelligence found enough time to reflect on itself. In both cases, Earth deserves care. Mystery, when approached gently, as a way of reorganizing values. Certainty often narrows focus. Mystery broadens it. When answers are unavailable or unnecessary, attention shifts to relationship rather than explanation. The relationship humans have with Earth is immediate. Breath depends on atmosphere. Food depends on soil. Water depends on climate. No matter where humanity began, it exists here now. That fact is simple, unambiguous, and grounding. Resting with a mystery of origin allows that grounding to deepen. It replaces entitlement with gratitude. Gratitude does not require proof. It arises naturally when something is recognized as fragile and sustaining at the same time. There is also relief in letting go of the need to know everything. Human curiosity is powerful, but it can become restless when it demands resolution from questions that are inherently open-ended. Some questions are not meant to be answered within a single lifetime, or even within a single species' awareness. They exist to stretch perception rather than to settle it. The question of where humanity comes from stretches perception outward. It encourages thinking in longer timelines. It invites humility about the limits of current knowledge. It creates space for wonder without requiring fantasy. Wonder, unlike speculation, does not insist on being right. It insists on being attentive. Attention is a form of care. As the mind settles, it becomes possible to notice how many of humanity's most meaningful practices already operate comfortably within mystery. Love does not require complete understanding to exist. Meaning does not require absolute certainty. Ethics do not require perfect origin stories. They require awareness of impact. In this sense, resting with mystery is not passive. It is active engagement without force. There is a tendency, especially in modern discourse, to treat unanswered questions as failures. This tendency is relatively new. For most of human history, unanswered questions were expected. They were integrated into belief systems, art, and daily life. Mystery was not a gap to be filled, but a presence to be respected. Science did not eliminate mystery, it refined it. Each discovery answered some questions and opened others. The deeper inquiry goes, the more it encounters edges where certainty fades into probability. Recognizing those edges is part of scientific literacy, not a rejection of it. The exploration of cosmic origin sits precisely at one of those edges. Evidence guides thought up to a point. Beyond that point, interpretation begins. Responsible interpretation acknowledges its limits. What is known is substantial. Humans evolve through identifiable processes. Earth's history is well studied. The solar system's formation is increasingly understood. None of this collapses under the weight of speculation. It remains intact. What remains open is context. Context is not decoration. It changes meaning. A human life viewed as an isolated event feels fragile. The same life viewed as part of a long lineage feels connected. Context does not change facts. It changes orientation. Resting with the mystery allows orientation to remain flexible. There is also a practical benefit to this posture. Humans face challenges that require long-term thinking. Climate stability, biodiversity preservation, technological risk, and intergenerational responsibility all demand perspectives that extend beyond immediate reward. Questions about origin naturally extend perspective. They remind humans that survival is not guaranteed, that environments can change, and that continuity depends on care. These reminders do not need to be frightening. They can be steadying. A species that understands that worlds can fail is more likely to protect the one it inhabits. Whether Earth is humanity's birthplace or refuge, the obligation is the same. Maintain the conditions that allow life, culture, and reflection to continue. Reduce harm, preserve balance. Think beyond immediate gain. Mystery supports this obligation by preventing complacency. There is also personal comfort in allowing uncertainty to remain. Many people carry anxiety rooted in the need to have everything explained. Letting go of that need can feel like setting down a weight that has been carried unconsciously. One does not need to know where humanity began to live responsibly now. One does not need certainty about cosmic ancestry to feel belonging on Earth. Belonging is enacted, not inherited. Every act of care reinforces belonging. Every effort to preserve what sustains life strengthens the bond between humans and their environment. In that sense, Earth becomes home through behavior, not origin. As this exploration comes to a pause, it does not close a door. It simply stops pushing it. The question remains not as a challenge, but as a quiet presence. It can be returned to or set aside. It does not demand allegiance. Some nights, looking up at the sky will feel different after considering it. Other nights, it will feel the same. Both responses are valid. Mystery does not require constant attention to exist. What matters is that the question has been allowed to do its work. It has softened assumptions. It has expanded scale. It has encouraged humility and care without insisting on belief. That is enough. Where humanity comes from may remain uncertain. Where humanity is not. Here on this planet, in this moment, breath continues, thought continues, attention continues. And for now, that is a sufficient place to rest, allowing curiosity to remain gentle, awareness to remain open, and the unanswered question to remain exactly what it needs to be. Not a problem to solve, but a space to settle into, quietly, without urgency, without conclusion, simply present as the night continues. And the sky, as always, remains above, unchanged by our wondering, yet somehow made more meaningful by it.